A world that stands in ruins, destroyed buildings, ice floes that pierced cars, and a man walking towards the big ice throne. The world was destroyed by his daughter, and after meeting with the Ice Queen, who was sitting on her ice throne, the man asked Sora why the girl did it. Looking with her icy eyes, and the weakling Lee Sajun, the girl asked why now he decided to play father. The father looked sadly at his daughter, who was sitting on her throne, and asked her father if he had come to destroy her, justifying the title of hunter. The father wondered to himself if Sora really wanted this. Others were standing behind him and asked the young man to accept that this was no longer his daughter, now she was a monster. In front of the young man was a comet that informed him of his opinion. Our hero knew that his daughter was in front of him, and not a monster. He answered the others. The man, informing the young man that he would not force him to participate in the fight, and asked him to return. The rest of the warriors standing behind the old calm sun were ready to attack in full uniform. Our hero, standing with his back to his daughter and drawing his weapon, looked at the old man. The same did not understand what the man's behavior meant. Then the father explained that he was not here to kill Sora. He came to protect her. The Dreamcom informed the young man that the girl would die anyway, but then his father asked him to send him to his forefathers, and smiling looked death in the eyes. He knew that he had failed as a parent and was absolutely useless for both Sora and Calm Sun. At these reflections, he and the old man, looking at each other, clashed in a fight. The father could not idly look at the murder of his own daughter, with all the current situation and despite what kind of parent he had become. And lying on the cold ground after the attack, our hero fell in battle. The daughter saw how her father was pulling his hand towards her, and his eyes were slowly closing. She was beside herself with anger. She used all her might, gathered all her strength. The last quest on Earth has been started. The hunters were looking at the final boss. They had to kill the witch Lee Sora. The father, with tears in his eyes and with the last of his strength, looked at his daughter, apologizing to her for everything. Then the earth under him collapsed from the power of Sora. Falling into the unknown, our hero thought only that if only he could start all over again. The unique quest of Hunter Lee Sajun was started at this moment. A unique quest changed the future. Regression has begun. Here you could see the hero's life, student life, acquaintance with a girl, love, and the birth of a child, where the mother was not happy, and then quarrels and scandals in the family, after which the mother and daughter left. Father, then the girl's mother dies, and the girl is taken away by the services. After that, a terrible life forces the girl to become exactly that witch. Regression is complete. Our hero woke up on the bed as a young boy. The sun was shining outside. Standing up, the young man at first did not understand where he was, because he clearly remembered how he died yesterday on the top of the mountain. Seeing the phone behind him, the hero looked at the time and found that he had returned to the past, 2025. Looking at himself in the mirror, he thought that it was impossible. He was only young himself in front of him, and how he managed to return to the past was also a mystery to the young man. Sitting on the bed, he thought about what was happening. Then the doorbell rang, and someone was questioning Lee Sajun inside. It was Yu Yong. The young man ran to the door and opened it. In front of him was a girl, and next to her daughter. Mom asked. Soru wanted to say hello to his father. The young man looked at the child in horror, and the girl smiled happily. The girl stood in the doorway and tried to appease the hero, telling him that she understood his feelings, that she unexpectedly showed up on his doorstep, and that his child was in front of him. Holding his head, he repeated the word unexpectedly, because the girl came after so many years to introduce him to his daughter. And he asked if the girl took this baby to threaten him. The girl wanted to object something, but then the young man asked if the girl had proof. The girl was looking at the cursing parents at that moment. The father in front of the child asked if the girl had gone out somewhere else, and that without proof of paternity, the girl would not return. The girl, upset, stood and looked at the man who could be her father. The young man recalled that in his previous life he had chased his mother away with his daughter and considered himself the most terrible person. But now before him was the quest of Sora's 5 misfortunes. The young man looked at his daughter, and she looked at him in surprise, thinking that this child was destined to destroy the world. And now she looked so cute and innocent. There were so many misfortunes that happened to Sora, but Sajun didn't know a single one that had overtaken her. Now that the young man thought about it, they haven't had any good memories at all since they met. Not only did he not recognize the girl as his own child, but he also let down Yoonhee, who loved the girl until her death. After that, the care of Sora fell on the shoulders of the young man. But he was overwhelmed with guilt and regrets. When the girl left them, the young man worked, raking up piles of debts. Sora was abandoned to her fate. The reason why Sora became a witch was because of the hero himself, as he believed. a child who had no right to call him daddy. Clenching his fist, the young man thought about it, and the girl, seeing the reaction, began to calm him down and talk about the child, but the young man said he believed her. This reaction surprised the girl, and our hero, squatting down, looked at his daughter and told her affectionately that she was his daughter. The girl looked at her father with fascination. Standing in the doorway, the young man invited them to come inside, because they probably got tired on the way, and held out his hand to his daughter so that she could grab it. Addressing the girl as a princess, she held out her hand to him, smiling, and they all went inside together, smiling at each other. Sitting at the table, the girl thought about how the young man had changed. The man who was a slob in life suddenly cleaned out the whole house as soon as they entered it, and now he was calmly playing with Sora, even though it was their first meeting. Yoonhee told Sejun that yesterday he was still a green youth, and now he has changed. The young man, treating his guests and sitting down at the table, said that everything in the world is changing. Sejun decided to find out from the girl why she had been silent until today. Yoonhee said that they parted on a bad note, and the girl found out about the pregnancy when the young man was called. Yoonhee thought that she would raise the girl alone, but she herself could not cope with the problems that piled up. Then the hero decided to ask what happened to the girl. Yoonhee had an accident, her house burned down, and now she didn't know who to stay with. She did not ask to take responsibility, because she gave birth to a girl of her own volition. Then what did they want to do? The hero asked. The girl asked to be allowed to stay with the young man for a while, because mom could not let the child sleep in a motel. The young man immediately agreed, even though the girl started talking about the pantry. Sejun explained that his house was not too big, but if you remove unnecessary junk, then there will be a place for a mother and daughter. And getting up, the young man asked where the things were. The girl was shocked by the whole situation and the way our hero behaved, because Lee Sejun would not have agreed to such a thing so easily, because he was a problematic and immature guy. But now looking at him, she saw how the young man carefully communicated with his daughter and brought their things to the apartment. The girl admitted to herself honestly in her head, because when she came to the young man, she was ready to listen to a whole lot of flattering words in her address. The young man interrupted her reasoning, saying that his proposal might seem a little chaotic to her, but after asking about them, the young man offered to get married, which plunged the girl into a big shock. She couldn't understand what had happened until they saw each other. Her drink was pouring right past her mouth at that moment. She was in the sediment. Yoonhee tried to replay the whole day in her head, starting from the moment when the hero believed that Sora was his daughter after the first meeting and without any hesitation let them live in his house, and now also an offer. The hero understood that if he didn't say it now, he would be very sorry. He had to take responsibility for what he had done. His heart was ready to fix everything right now. After all, the time and emptiness that came after the death of Yang showed him what an important person the girl was. They were sitting at the table opposite each other, and in an icy voice she called Sejun, saying that she came to him because her affairs were really bad, and not because she had any feelings left. The young man realized that they did not part on a good note, so it would be strange if she loved him still. An unexpected marriage. The girl did not know what to say. She thanked Sejun for allowing them to live at his place, but offered to wait with the marriage. The young man agreed. Our hero knew that this would be the girl's answer. It's not too late to win the trust of Yoonhee with small steps, Sejun thought after all the conversation they had and based on the past experience that the hero had. They were sitting at the table and discussing their lives, and the girl was lying next to her and looking at her parents. While Yoonhee was dressing the girl, the young man asked, after all, taking care of spending money on her, and even earning money to maintain the house is a colossal work. Did she have any plan? The hero thought to himself that the girl would rely on him, but she replied that she had something in mind, and Yoonhee replied that she wanted to join the guild. Washing dishes and listening to the girl and words about the guild, he stopped and thought that this was one of the causes of Sora's misfortunes. The girl reported that she would become a hunter, and that's why she asked to take care of Sora. But after looking at his mother and happy daughter, the young man realized that this had not happened in his past life. 25 years ago, 10 years before the real events. In an instant, the world collapsed for everyone. A hole appeared in the wall through which icy energy passed, and meanwhile people were quietly walking with their children and living their usual lives. But everything changed. It was a previously unprecedented natural disaster. From this very hole in the wall, all kinds of evil spirits came out through the spatial cracks and led to the destruction of humanity. The world was plunged into chaos. However, people survived despite everything that was happening in the world, because there were those who were able to use the mana flowing from the otherworldly space, turning it into power. People capable of defeating the invincible. Something began to be called hunters. Yoonhee was heading to the building the next day to find out her options about a new job. The contract that was in her hands she received from the guild. Our hero asked the girl if she had signed it. Un had not yet made a decision at that time, and therefore the contract was not signed. But the advantages and benefits beckoned the girl, so she thought about signing it. The guys were sitting at home and discussing the situation while their daughter was sleeping. After the story about the contract, Un asked our hero if he was worried about something in this contract. The young man, exhaling, spoke about the pitfalls that hunters' contracts breathe. Many guilds are lured into a trap in this way, so they enrich themselves, and our hero believed that it was better not to take risks. Yoonhee was surprised by Sojin's words and thought that if she did not sign the contract, she would not be able to pay off the debt and become the mistress of her life. Sojin suggested that Yoonhee sign the contract as she wanted. If the girl did not see any problems for herself, then it was necessary to act. But if she felt something was wrong, then Sojin himself would grow a hunter out of her. On the way to the guild building, Yoonhee recalled the conversation with Sojin and thought about how the guy had changed. When they parted in the past, it was difficult to distinguish a young man from a child. In the evening, laying down his daughter, who asked Sojin if her parents would sleep, our hero answered his daughter that they had a lot to discuss and they would go to bed right after her. The girl watched the conversation between her daughter and the young man, who wished pleasant dreams, smiling with a sincere smile, and after this picture she thought that he was probably really a dad. The next day, Sojin brought Sora to eat ice cream, and looking at all kinds of flavors, the girl could not choose one in any way. When asked by her father if she chose the taste, she still decided that she wanted chocolate, and the hero asked for an alien mom and an average cup at the checkout. At that moment, he was thinking that he knew the guild, that he had contacted Yoon and he was familiar with their methods. The guild lured hunters with all sorts of bonuses and then slammed the trap, enslaving them under the pretext of debt. In a previous life, this scheme plunged the young man into debt up to his ears, and as a result, he spent all the remaining days on the battlefield. Yoonhee was in a similar situation. She was under pressure from the guild all her life and met death before she reached her potential. The death of Un may well be one of the 5 misfortunes of Sora, the hero decided. The girl stood and looked at the ice cream in horror with tears in her eyes. Then her father decided to ask Sora what happened. The girl thought she would become an alien, like her mother, having heard earlier the names of the ice cream that her father took for her. He calmed his daughter and picked her up while she was eating ice cream, laughing and talking about the name, which was really funny. The girl was also smiling. She liked that there was a lot of ice cream. The seller gave a big ball of ice cream for the cute reaction of the girl. The young man was thinking about his cute daughter, who went by the jeans in Und, and the girl, meanwhile, interrupted the young man's thoughts by putting ice cream on his cheek. The father could not understand what she wanted from him and thought that the girl did not like the ice cream. Sora just wanted dad to try the ice cream too and smiled at him. Then the hero thought about the fact that Sora never called him dad. Previously, due to the fact that Sojin was so little at home, he returned home late, and the girl was always alone and crying. He practically did not talk to his daughter. He didn't create shared memories and left her even when she needed him the most. The first and last time she called him daddy was a terrible memory, where the girl was taken away from her father and she screamed for help. Buying ice cream for the girl and watching her reaction, Sojin only now found out that Sora loves ice cream, so he considered himself a bad father. It reminded him of how little time he and his daughter spent together. In addition to preventing Sora's misfortunes, our hero decided to create as many happy memories together as possible. And smiling at the girl, he took a taste of ice cream, thanking Sora for it. Just thinking that everything was fine, Sojin heard the sound of a siren, which meant that a sudden rift appeared somewhere. Usually, the location of the crack is calculated in advance, and hunters arrive at the zone of occurrence before this happens. The territory is immediately fenced off and people have to go to the shelter. But this siren that sounded now meant that the rift had opened unexpectedly. The probability of such a crack appearing was very small, but it did not happen in his past life, Sojin thought. The girl looked at her father with fear, and he concentrated on asking Sora to hold on to him tightly and reassured his daughter that everything would be fine. While he was running home, the butterfly effect came to his mind. The fluttering of her wings creates a storm. Inai, who previously did not trust anyone with Sora, unexpectedly left her for Sojin. And now a crack has suddenly appeared all these years because of our hero, because of his interference in the future, something has changed. The hero, with all his thoughts about the changes that were taking place, holding Sora tightly, ran home. Right in front of him at that moment a crack formed and evil spirits climbed out of there, which our hero looked at in horror and despair, and thought that he had not done anything that could lead to this. The cretin bull appeared from the crack, and everyone began to run away in horror. If our hero had caught him before his return, he would have dealt with him immediately, but now the young man was just an ordinary person and, like everyone else, rushed to run, holding Sora in his arms. It was the only thing he was capable of. Sora looked at the bull in horror and warned her father about the danger. The bull attacked the young man with his daughter, but he managed to evade, asking Sora if she was all right. The young man asked his daughter to listen to him very carefully and hide between two houses that were not far from them. The young man asked Sora not to go out until he allowed it. The girl understood everything and ran to where her father said. Sajun, looking at the bull, saw that he was aiming directly at him. The bull was standing across the street from the hero, and as the young man thought, he was going to rush straight at him. The bull went on the attack, and our hero was thinking that if he had at least some kind of weapon and seeing a broom behind him, he decided to rush to her. Grabbing a broom, the bull attacked the hero, and Sora at that moment was watching the situation and worried about her father. Jumping back, the young man survived, but only because he surrounded his body with mana, but there was a limit to everything. Even though Sajun only had a homemade spear in his hands, but he had no choice, he had to fight. The hero couldn't escape right now. After the siren stops, about 5 minutes will pass before the arrival of help, and if he lasts this time, Sora will be saved. Looking at the bull in front of him, our hero thought that these 5 minutes could be the longest in his life. He had every chance to lose his life, but he had to endure, even if he had to spend every last drop of mana, and his body would not stand it. At the beginning of his journey in his previous life, the hero was too weak to become a full-fledged hunter. Because of this, other fighters left him far to spare, and his anxiety grew every day. During the desperate search for a way to survive, the young man studied absolutely all books about monsters. The vulnerability of the cretin bull is its eyes, and at any cost the hero decided to hit it there. Jumping and throwing his spear, the young man decided that he would not allow Sora to live such a life again. He could not collect enough mana with such a body, and did not think that he had hit the target directly. How the young man did it was a mystery to himself. The bull howled in pain, and then the young man saw the magic of ice. The bull was completely distraught, and the young man was thinking about the house that was going to collapse. The house where Sora was hiding, who was now in danger. Sora, who was standing in an alley between collapsing houses, looked at her father in panic when the building began to fall directly on her. But when she opened her eyes, she only found her dad bending over her. All wounded, he asked if Sora was whole. The girl looked at her father in tears that collapsed right with her. At the moment when he almost lost consciousness, he saw a guild that could be trusted with Sora and disconnected. In the evening, in horror, Un came running to the hospital looking for Sora and Sajun. The girl rushed to her mother's arms, and she asked if everything was all right with her. But the girl pointed to her father, who was lying in a hospital bed all bandaged up, and informed her mother that Sora was not injured and therefore she did not need to worry. The girl told her mother that her father was protecting her, and at that moment the girl began to cry. Sajun, seeing this, jumped up from his bed and asked the girl to calm down, because he could even stand and joked that he had gone too far and it was all a joke that he and Sora came up with, for which he immediately received from a girl who was angry at Sajun for being able to joke such things in such a situation. Stupid jokes. In the evening, sitting on a bench outside the hospital, Un thanked Sajun for protecting Sora, but he was her father and therefore wanted to save the girl, asking how she felt now. Uni explained to her father that she had left the girl with her grandmother, who was supposed to look after her, so the wait was fine. The young man, drinking his drink, said that Sora was very scared. It was good that she came to her senses so quickly, but there was something the young man wanted to ask about the girl from Young. When he was fighting with the bull, something strange happened. It seemed to him that someone had used ice magic, and he thought that Sora had done it. Looking at Yoon after the words he said, the young man saw fear on the face of the girl, who just looked at the floor and did not answer anything. The young man asked what Yoon would say to what he thought about Sora. The girl first told Sajun that it was nonsense because the girl could barely say magic and it was a lot of work to connect a couple of words for her, and it was difficult to create a spell herself because the girl was small. The young man looked at her in silence, and he asked me to repeat everything that the girl had said before, but only looking into his eyes. Is it true that it wasn't Sora who did it? The girl turned the glass in her hands and asked if she could trust Sajun. The young man said that Sora was his daughter and he would never do anything that could harm her. She believed the young man, because he believed her when she came to him with Sora and said that this was his daughter. And Yuni said that that magic was probably really Sora and she did it. The girl reminded us why she was on the threshold of our hero. Then they lost their home with their daughter and it was the work of Sora. It all happened when the girl lost control of herself. So far, Yuni thought there was nothing to worry about, but if they found out about it, she was afraid that Sora would be taken to the laboratory. Taking Young's hand, Sajin promised her that he would protect Sora at any cost, because after all, the girl was his daughter. Then Uns asked if the young man allowed the idea that Sora was not his daughter. This made Sajin think for a second, but then he smiled at the girl and said that it was not important. He would not condemn the girl for this. The young man understood that last time he would never have said that and would have denied the existence of Sora from time to time. Yuni laughed and smiled at the young man in a way she had never done before she made him blush and blush. The hero thought to himself that everything was wrong with his head. Before moving to the past body, he was more than 40 years old, and Un is now only 26, and she was old enough to be his daughter, so the young man tried to collect his thoughts. The hero believed that he had no right to these feelings. The young man decided to ask Un how the deal with the guild went, and the girl told him that, as the young man said, there were a lot of slippery moments in the contract. Yuni voiced one problem after another and, saying that she still had a lot of options, slammed the door. Although the girl scattered loud words, but in fact, no other guild made offers to her, and therefore Un did not know what to do. Our hero, upon hearing this, lit up with happiness and said that he would train the girl himself. She only needed to trust him. Sujin promised Yuni to teach her his super secret technique. The girl, laughing and blushing, said that the main super secret for her was the guy himself. The next day, Sajin brought Yuni and Sora to a place he called the Vaunted Secret. It was where he brought the two girls that the workshop was located. Sora and Un looked at the place in surprise, because in front of them was an incomprehensible half-abandoned building that did not look at all like the place they needed. Yuni asked Sajin if workshops weren't usually located in shopping malls or guild buildings. Sajin explained that the prices in shopping malls were inflated and it was necessary to be in a guild to use their weapons. So the hero asked just to trust him. Arriving at the warehouse on it, a lot of weapons were found and Un was surprised to see a place that was really a workshop. Sora rushed to the objects, calling them charm, and was all glowing with happiness. An elderly man immediately came out to them and asked what the young people wanted. The young man was glad to himself because they had come to the right place. While Sajin was in the hospital, he had time to sort out his memories before he returned to the past, and then the guy remembered this man who had just greeted them. He was a blacksmith, who was nicknamed the Lord of Iron Kang Koli for his merits. The young man greeted the man and introduced himself, said that he wanted to become a hunter. Un looked at him point blank and then, after greeting him, also introduced herself and said that she wanted to be a hunter. The daughter looked at her parents with a questioning look, and then introduced herself as the daughter of her parents. The man laughed, looking at the whole family. In his opinion, they knew a lot about greeting. And the man introduced himself as Kang Koli and asked to be called that. The young man explained to their new acquaintance that they would like to become hunters, and the man finished the young man's sentence with the words that they needed weapons for this and asked what type of young people preferred. Our hero preferred the spear. The girl has not yet decided when she was asked and asked to give her a little time to look around. The weapons are made of mithril and various materials from the dungeons, said Kang Kol. Even for a beginner, it will be easy to handle this. The young man looked at the beautiful swords and a spear in front of him, and the man realized that he was well versed in weapons, while the girl looked thoughtfully at what she had to choose. And then turning to Unhei, the hero offered her a bow. The young man explained his choice by the fact that the girl was able to concentrate and reason sensibly, and therefore the bow was an ideal option. Once asked if she would be able to wield a bow, then Kang offered the girl to make a couple of test shots. The girl decided that she would just trust Sajin and take the bow, because our hero clearly knew what he was talking about. Khan reported that the guys could not return the money or make a refund of the weapon if they changed their minds, but it was always possible to exchange it for free in his workshop. The heroes agreed to Kang Kal's demands, and then the man handed them the price for everything after looking at the check. Undecided that it was very expensive, but Sajin said he would pay for everything, because he had a stash and he promised earlier that he would help. The girl looked at her parents, who were arguing about money because Un wanted to return everything to Sajin and no matter how much it was, and our hero certainly did not consider her obliged to do this. Then Sora, asking her mother, said that if she needed a lot of money, the girl would not eat sweets. Un asked Sora not to say such a thing, and our hero was immediately puzzled and remembered their conversation with Un at the hospital. It was not visible from Sora, but it seems that she is just a very attentive and kind child. But for her mother she is too old for her years, in which the children were still capricious, but probably it was because they always lived in need. And Yoonhee wanted Sora to have everything, whatever she wants. Then Kang said that Grandpa was obliged to treat Sora with sweets and handed out a check. Kang said that he liked the family very much, and especially the charming daughter of the guys, and therefore he decided to give them a discount, crossing out the old price on the receipt. He wrote a new one and handed it to the heroes again. They looked in surprise at the man who was so kind to them and took pity, making a discount. It was clear that they were now paying only for the cost of materials. And then Grandpa asked if they were buying or not, because he had been holding the check for a very long time, and his hand could fall off right now. The guys were grateful for such a discount, and after buying weapons they left the workshop satisfied. It was already sunset on the street, and the heroes were walking home. Sajin thought that now they had weapons and they could move on according to plan. Young and his daughter were walking behind him, and the young man, calling the girl, suggested that she train together to go to the dungeon. He was very happy looking at Yoonhee, who was next to him. Yoonhee was running with a bow in her hand and aiming at a tree that had a target on it. But by concentrating and using mana, she was able to hit the target by punching through the tree. Sajin saw it and was surprised that the girl broke through the tree. Sajin was looking at Yoonhee, and Sora was standing next to him and smiling happily at her mother. The hero brought a snack and offered Yoonhee a break. After sitting down in the forest, they had a picnic and decided to take a break, having a snack of tteokbokki and sauce. Yoonhee liked the place for training, where there was no one, and asked Sajin how the young man found out about him. Sajin replied that it was another of his secrets, a space hidden in the depths of the mountains, where the young man trained before returning to the past. In a few weeks, the young man taught Un basic fighting skills. For example, the hero showed Un how to hold a bow on his back with mana. They spent a lot of time together and were able to practice before going to the dungeon. The young man was sitting opposite Un and was amazed that the girl managed to pierce through the tree, and decided to clarify whether the girl was holding a bow for the first time or not. In the past, due to the rules of the guild, Young had to wield only a sword, but not having the talent to wield this very sword, she constantly broke it in the middle of battle. One day, Un picked up the bow of a fallen partner and her talent showed up, Sajin recalled. They were sitting in the forest, and the young man asked how the mana control training was progressing at Un. The girl did not work out very well. She tried to concentrate mana, as Sajin said, but it turned out only once. The girl didn't know if she would be able to go to the dungeon with such skills. Then Sora, who was looking at her parents, told her mother that she could do what her father said and said that she could teach her. Sajin turned to Sora with a question, and the girl said about mana. The next moment Sora showed her skills, and the excited Sajin and Un were already looking at their child's skills with apprehension. The young man, stroking the girl on the head and praising her, asked her to disperse mana, because it was dangerous. The girl, smiling, immediately obeyed her father, and then mana turned into beautiful dust. The girl jumped up and ran to look at mana, which scattered like thousands of stars, and Un and Sajin realized that they had to be on guard for the good of their daughter. The guys were thinking who they could leave her for while they were in the dungeon, because taking their daughter to such a dangerous place was not the best decision for parents. Then Sajin remembered someone he could rely on and asked him not to worry about Yoonhee. No matter how much the young man tried to turn the present for his own good, relying on knowledge about the future, everything always went smoothly. Sajin was sitting on his knees, and his daughter was peeking over the young man's shoulder. The young man thought that the one he was addressing would agree as soon as he saw Sora and greeted his father. The same did not agree on the phone when the hero called him, but the young man did not expect that his father would not even raise an eyebrow at the sight of Sora. The father sat and looked at his son in silence. After a long pause, the father asked Sajin whose daughter it was, and then the young man immediately replied that Sora was his daughter. But the father did not ask about the young man, but about the mother. Then Sajin reminded his father about Anhe, and his father remembered a sweet girl with whom his son had once introduced him. Immediately after the information passed to him, the father asked when the wedding would be at the young people, and our hero replied that he had just proposed to the girl, and that she had not yet agreed. The father was confused by the fact that they had not planned the wedding yet, but when Sajin said that the girl did not agree, the father was furious with this, and the young man tried to calm him down, saying that he would explain everything later, because now he came to ask for a favor. And pointing at the girl behind his back, he introduced Sora to her grandfather. The man held out his hand to the girl and introduced himself as Jaewon, which confused Sora because usually everyone admired her appearance and cute face. Then grandfather stretched out his hand to her tender cheeks and was stunned with delight that he did not even utter a word when Sora called him grandfather. But after that, the old man came to his senses, and the young man asked him if he could look after Sora while he and Un were gone. Grandfather clarified what the young man wanted from him, and it was just about the weekend. Then, hearing notes of reflection in his head, the hero began to say that he would try to look for someone else, but his father did not say that he was against it and hugged Sora. After the visit to the grandfather, our heroes met in the store, and Un sadly thought that she should have gone with the young man to his father. But Sajin told the girl that no one knew how he could react to her, and it seemed to the young man that the grandfather was crazy about Sora, which calmed his mother. Standing at the window, the consultant girl showed the young couple the bracelet they ordered. The young man, thanking the consultant, put the bracelet on his hand. And Un wondered if the bracelet contained exactly the stone that Sora found. The stone looked beautiful in the bracelet, and the mother's statement was true. It was the light of mana. When the guys were in the workshop, Sora found something so amazing that Kang himself did not see. When Grandpa asked what the girl liked and that he would give her anything she wanted, the girl saw a sparkling thing in the coals, which she pointed to with her finger. But at first Kang did not understand what Sora was talking about because there was only garbage in front of him. But after he said that Sora had found a treasure, Sajin looked into the box and saw the light of mana. This is a stone that begins to shine when it detects mana nearby. It is used to search for artifacts in dungeons, so its price was not small. Taking the Sora stone, she immediately gave it to her father, but he refused because it was her gift. But the girl saw how his father wanted him and therefore gave the stone to him, because the girl was just interested to find out what kind of sparkle it was and she didn't need it at all. Sajin was beaming with joy. Standing at the window, Un asked Sajin if they had only come for the bracelet. The young man told the girl that the bracelet could only be made here and it was necessary before going to the dungeon. But since they were here, the hero offered to look at some clothes for Sora. Even though he was not here for that at all, Sajin thought to himself. Then they were interrupted by screams, and the guys saw a young man who was walking along the red carpet under the flashes of cameras and who was met by fans. It was Suhan's dream. Un asked if the young man was the same Hunter TV star, and the hero looked at the guy sadly and with contempt said that it was a dream of Suhan himself, a famous hunter advertising his guild via TV. The guy became famous thanks to his beautiful appearance. When she saw Sajin's reaction to the guy, she thought that something was bothering him and remembered that quite recently the young man had suffered protecting Sora, and maybe he was afraid to go to the dungeon. Then uncalming the hero said that she would protect him. The young man could not understand which sister was in question, because they were the same age. The young man just didn't want to cross paths with that guy. Leaving the scene, the hero looked at Suhan's dream. This guy was a master of the Knights Guild, which was engaged in extorting a debt from Yang. While distracting the young man from his thoughts, she asked if they had bought everything and how much time was left before the formation of the dungeon. The young man said that there was very little left, looking at his phone. As soon as 2 o'clock struck, the floor under the guys began to collapse. Yuni thought it was an earthquake, but the young man knew that they were already closed. Everyone around did not expect this, and a chasm formed in the middle of the shopping center. Sajin knew he shouldn't have let his guard down, because this was just the beginning. Holding a spear in his hands, the young man looked at the crack that had formed. The bracelet on the young man's arm glowed more than before, and Yuni did not understand what the young man meant by saying that this was just the beginning. But then there was another burst of energy, and the system reported that the dungeon was created. The launch of the special quest has begun. The people sitting near the crack saw 100 sparkling eyes and began to run away. These eyes belonged to the evil spirits that crawled out of the crack. They looked like giant spiders with glowing purple shells. Our heroes grabbed their weapons, the young man for a spear and the girl for a bow and arrows. The dungeon was already here and they had to clean it up in the destroyed mall. And all this 100 spiders moved on the inhabitants and our heroes. Everyone rushed from the crack and ran screaming about monsters who were. But after trying to escape from the mall, people found that the doors to it were locked and asked to be released, begging, because someone was with children and someone and everything did not want to part with life in the mall in this way. Yunhee asked Sajin what they were going to do and how they would clear this building of monsters, which turned out to be too many. But our hero was already jumping into the thick of things and Un was shouting after him. Sajin jumped down from the 2nd floor and saw a guy asking for help, and there were several spiders in front of him. But Sajin instantly killed them and saved the guy, offering him to run to the exit, because the hunters will soon arrive. He thanked the hero with tears in his eyes and ran to the exit. Standing at the bottom, our hero asked Un to go down to him, and said that if they unite with hunters, it will be easier to deal with monsters. Sojun was standing at the bottom and clutching his spear, having just saved a young man who was running to the exit. Yoonhee looked at him and was preparing to go down to the hero too. Sun Sehyun, with a stony face, defeating monsters, saved people and then asked the hunters to concentrate on the monsters, otherwise the building would collapse. At that moment, a girl clung to him, who was afraid of the monster and asked to get her out of here, which greatly annoyed the hunter and he pushed her right into the monster's paws. The guys, seeing this, hurried to her. The girl was calling for help, and Sojun was thinking about Sohyun's act, which doomed the girl to suffering. She sat and helplessly covered her face with her hands, in front of the monster that was ready to attack her. But at that moment another hunter came to the rescue. It was a girl. Our hero wondered why she was here. Ko Hween, the huntress who held the line until the end of the world and who shouldn't be here right now. Sojun asked himself to stop flying in the clouds. She looked at the young man, and he asked all the hunters to gather in a circle with civilians in the center, offering to become a protective wall for civilians. And I asked the guys not to panic and concentrate on their work. They were all standing with their backs to each other at that moment. All of them fought monsters that attacked hunters from different sides. The last monster was defeated, and everyone exhaled. Our hero asked if Un was okay. The girl, smiling, said that she was fine, but her legs were not holding her. Sohyun stood behind the guys and recalled recent events. When they came to the guild, they greeted him like a master, and the man who conducted the interview with Un reported that one promising hunter almost swallowed the bait, holding Un's resume. The man also said that the girl found all the disadvantages in the contract, which was kept silent. Sohyun walked up to Yoonhee and smiling, thanked the girl for her hard work and complimenting how incredible the girl was. Un thanked the young man without much enthusiasm. And immediately Sojun came to the fore to meet him, offering to shake hands with each other. Our hero, smiling, introduced himself and was glad to meet. The young man also introduced himself to our hero. Sojun saw the young man even inflamed with anger when he shook his hand. Then a young mother ran up to them and begged them to save her child. The child was bitten and the boy was poisoned by an earth spider. Our hero, sitting on his knees next to him, said that if help was provided quickly, the child would survive. The young man explained to his mother that the exit would open only after a complete cleaning of the dungeon, and if now they would defeat the boss. But without finishing, Sohyun appeared behind and expressed his protest. Sohyun said that the exit itself will open in 24 hours. Did Sojun seriously want to kill the boss with so many people? Sojun said that there were enough of them, and the child would not be able to wait that long. Even if he received first aid, he would not make it to the arrival of an ambulance. Then Sohyun called the hero a novice because he would never go into the dungeon, about which he knows nothing, and offered to shove the young man his arrogance far away, and decided to stay there. Yoonhee wanted to say how ugly Sohyun was, because he didn't even want to try to save the child, and the guards pretended not to notice anything. The bitter truth was that Song Sehyun only went into battle when there were escape routes. The boy was bandaged, and that was all that could be done to make the child last a little longer. Then someone's voice said that he would go with them, and our heroes turned around and saw Ko Hween, who was introduced to the guys, because they were not familiar yet. The young man knew that he was definitely not mistaken about her. Yoonhee was smiling at the girl. In the past, when this dungeon opened, it was cleared by Ko Hween and Sun Sehyun after opening the exit. Song Sehyun told Ko Hween that he was disappointed and did not think that the girl fought so immaturely. Perhaps she wanted to go to the next world so much. The young man asked her. The girls looked at Suhyun's dream and were silent. Then Ko Hween asked him not to yap, because how he himself had not yet died with such strength was unclear to anyone. Hearing such an attack from a girl, he caught fire. Sojun, asking if everyone was ready, commanded that they were going. He and the two girls behind him were standing in front of the dungeon. To clean up the dungeon-destroyed shopping center was our hero's mission, and he bravely, accompanied by two girls, was ready to do it. After going down, Yoonhee asked what it was like to glow on the columns that were in the dungeon. It was the luminescent moss that grew in the darkest places of the dungeon. He was everywhere here. The girls walked side by side and smiling sweetly. Ko Hween told Yoonhee that she did not look like a beginner at all, but more like a seasoned hunter. Yoonhee was embarrassed by such compliments. Ko Hween thought to herself that Yoonhee and Sojun were amazingly capable for the first battle, looking at both of them. Especially Lee Saju. The young man was not only an excellent fighter, but also a skillful strategist. Then the girl decided to offer an idea, namely to choose a commander before the battle. At her suggestion, the guys turned to the girl who was walking behind them. The commander had to monitor the situation and give orders, and the girl considered herself not very suitable for such a role. Yoonhee also considered herself unsuitable for this role, and could not take such responsibility. Then, Ko Hween offered Sejun to take on such a role, because in her mind the girl believed that the young man had the makings of a true leader. Sejun was thinking to himself what a cunning girl was in front of him. The fact was that Hween was probing the ground in order to fully assess the abilities of our hero, and he decided that it was impossible to stand out too much, otherwise the young man would have a lot of problems later. Exhaling, the hero, of course, pretended that it was not his at all, but since both girls could not, he agreed to take on this role. The young man decided to pretend to be an amateur and lull the girls' vigilance. Yoonhee said that they were counting on him, and since they had decided everything, Sejun believed that it was possible to move forward. But only they went forward, and the young man felt that the boss was here. Ahead of them was a large pit in which a slug was lying. Ko Hween was asking how the boss could be a slug. After all, every novice could cut it, the girl thought. He stood behind and just looked at the monster, and Sejun believed that the girl should not underestimate the slug, because he was still the boss and apparently for a reason. The girl started commanding them to figure it out quickly, but Sejun reminded her that the captains had chosen him. Slugs reacted to vibrations coming from the ground, so it was necessary to descend carefully. Then, Ko Hween decided to go first and stepping carefully jumped down into the pit. Yoonhee went down the rope and asked Sejun when she could do it. The young man explained to the girl that they needed a couple more workouts for this. Then the rope broke and fell to the floor, hitting hard, thereby creating a strong vibration. Ko Hween thought it wasn't scary, even if the slug was healthy, but it had to be slow like a turtle. At that moment, the girl saw how quickly the slug approached but our hero picked up the girl in time and saved her. In horror, the two of them looked at the boss with whom they had to fight. Ko Hween thought it was impossible. In front of them was a monster that looked like a skeleton, and its bones were wrapped in slime. The boss started attacking the hunters blindly with all his might. Even though he was blind, he could feel the vibration perfectly. Hunters hid from the slug behind a stone wall. Sejun thought that everything was going according to the plan they had discussed earlier before going down. The guys were sitting and Sejun was talking about the weakness of slugs. It was fire. If you break the shell, not for long, but the boss core will be vulnerable. The young man and Hween will take care of it, and Yoonhee will be left behind. In case of danger, the girl had to cover Sejun and Hween and set fire to the monster. The young man thought that if the monster continues to attack furiously, the hero will not even be able to throw a bottle, let alone attack. It's no use sitting. Anyway, soon the monster will break the wall behind which the hunters were sitting and hiding from the monster. They needed to carry out their plan. Ko Hween, shaking hands, thought that it was just necessary to distract the monster, and only she of all knew how to create earthquakes with mana and asked to provide it to her. Concentrating mana in her legs, the girl said that she had no equal in endurance and she ran to distract the monster, creating an earthquake. The monster tried to break the wall without getting a meter closer. The girl continued to slip away. Watching the reaction, the girl saw that the monster has a large attack radius, but cannot move from its place. The girl felt like a trapped mouse. Taking the sword out of its scabbard, Hween thought about what if she could cut the shell and get to the core. Sejun, watching the girl and preparing for his role, saw a familiar stand. Fatal Fault, the technique that Hween used before his return. Using this technique, the girl attacked the boss, and in Sejun's memory, the girl could cut anything without flinching. But in this time span, her swordsman's skill left much to be desired. The girl attacked the boss and tried to hit him with her attack. Perseverance poured over the edge, despite the fact that the girl was shaking all over and the sword was about to break. While attacking the boss, Hween thought about how fast the slug was recovering, and that her sword didn't have long left. At that moment, the slug began to attack her, and the girl realized that it was already too late. The young man's attack came into play, and our hero threw the bottle that he had previously held in his hands. There was oil in the bottle, which poured out on the monster. The closer the mucus was to the core, the stronger it was. If the acidity is higher than that of other relatives, that's why the sword crumbles, the young man Ko Hween explained. First it was necessary to expose the outer shell. The girl said that it was easy for Sejun to judge, because she was almost sent to the next world by a monster, and she thanked the young man for saving her life. It was too early to thank, and the young man offered to leave. The monster was furious, and the girl, noticing this, informed our hero that the slug was fiercer than before. The young man said that apparently everything was because of the bottle that he threw at him. Hween asked about the next plan of action after they poured oil on the monster. The young man, running away with Hween, said that maybe the monster would not let them pour themselves, But while they were running, an attack was being prepared for Hveen from behind. The young man warned her, but he was afraid that with such a sword the girl would not be able to repel the attack. But then came to the rescue by setting fire to the arrow and attacked the slug. It burst into flames. In case of danger, needed to cover them and set fire to the monster, as the young man had said earlier. She had to do it with an arrow loaded with mana. It was the easiest way. Yoonhee was worried that she would not be able to cope, because she never practiced, and did not succeed in owning mana, thinking that she would not succeed. The young man took the girl by the shoulder and confidently told her that she could. Training in the battle with the spiders, the girl overcame everything and Sajin asked to believe in himself. And Yoonhee, believing, fired the same arrow loaded with mana directly at the monster. Hweon saw the core after her attack, and the young man commanded that they needed to attack faster until he recovered. Then Yoonhee launched another arrow. The slug tried to fight back, but it didn't work out. Un's arrows repelled all his attempts. Then Sajun and Hweon rushed to attack him, exposing their weapons. After charging his spear with mana, our hero jumped to the very goal and finding the core in the slug's head, he attacked it, hitting the target. There were a lot of people on the surface, along with reporters and local news. Reporters reported they were near the dungeon. The entrance to the supermarket Darien was blocked. Correspondents reported on the news. The building was surrounded by the victims' families waiting for news. According to experts, the dungeon will disappear tomorrow afternoon if it is not cleared earlier. Grandpa and Sora came to see the dungeon and the whole situation, who tried to find out from him where they had come. The father recalled a conversation with his son, asking where the guys were going. He heard in response from Sajin that the young man was going to the mall with for work, that there was not far away. At that moment the young man was stroking Sora on the head. Grandfather was surprised to find out that there was a shopping center nearby, and looked at his son, who was sitting next to his daughter, taking a spear and hanging it behind his back. The young man told his father that this shopping center had only recently opened and it was called Darien, saying goodbye to his father and opening the door. The young man already reported this information at the door and promised to return. Grandfather thought with pain in his heart about what could have happened and pressed the girl sitting in his arms. At that moment, he heard that the entrance had just opened and civilians and Hunter Sun Sahyun were coming out of it. The young man smiled at all the spectators, and the rest of the people followed him. Standing in the crowd, Grandpa was watching who was coming out, and then Sora was smiling and pointing at Mom and Dad. All three guys got out unharmed and sighed heavily after the work done. Seeing Sora calling her parents, the guys smiled and opened their arms to meet their joyful daughter running to them. Sora hugged her parents and Sajun and were happy to see the girl. They asked their daughter how she got here and if she came by herself. Hweon stood behind the guys and looked questioningly at the whole scene with the child in front of her. Going to the guys, the girl asked whose child it was and Sajun told her that it was their daughter Sora. Asking about her daughter, the girl wanted to know if Sajun and were married, to which our hero could not give an unambiguous answer. Sora looked at Hweon with her big beautiful eyes and greeted her, calling Hweon a sweet aunt, for which she immediately gained trust in her heart, because Sora was very sweet and charmed everyone around her. The girl started asking what Sora loved and Sajun realized that another fighter had fallen before his daughter's charm. Sora, hugging her parents, pointed to her grandfather standing in the crowd and said that she had come with him. The young man's father stood quietly in the crowd and watched the picture of the reunion of his daughter and parents after the weekend. It was clear from Grandpa's face that Sajun was in trouble, because he was very angry. The next day, a 6-year-old boy was broadcast on the news, the one who was bitten by a spider, and there was one chance to save the child if the guys fought the monster. A boy who was sitting on a hospital bed and told about how he was scared and hurt, but his aunt and uncle saved him. The child smiled and thanked them. Grandpa was looking at the guys in front of him. A little boy was being shown on the TV behind him. The job of a hunter seemed promising because it is full of privileges, but all hunters risk their lives protecting people from monsters. In front of him were Sora and Sajun playing with Sora, and he was thinking about their future. Pressing his hand and closing his eyes, the young man's father thought that the young man and the girl had both gone hunting. They weren't officially there yet, but with their exploits, it was only a matter of time. He didn't know whether to rejoice or cry. After all, they have already started talking about the guys on TV. Then the father decided to ask the young man a question about Sora, whether they would take care of the child on his shoulders every time. The young man sat and thought about it. On the other hand, holding the girl on her lap, she looked at Sajun, who was thinking to himself about a babysitter for Sora, whom he never found. At first, the grandfather looked at the young man with an evil look, but then sighed and said that he would take care of the girl. The young man asked if his father would be able to, and he agreed, because the girl was, according to him, a nice granddaughter. And after that, he asked Yoonhee to talk face to face. Having called the girl for a private conversation, the young man's father said that he did not force the girl to marry, but wanted to find out if the girl did not like Sajun. Then she explained that everything was wrong, rather it was even the opposite. Then, overjoyed, grandfather wanted the young man to lure him to him, and they got married as soon as possible. The girl was embarrassed by her grandfather's words. Then, putting his hands on the girl's shoulders, the boy's father told her that he was aware of her situation. Yoonhee recalled how she gave birth to Sora alone, and no one visited her in the hospital. The girl's parents left this world early, and the child's father also disappeared. Everyone was discussing Yoonhee in the hospital, who was alone with the child. It was all the girl's stubbornness that she was thinking about. How badly the girl broke up with Sajun, and the fact that giving birth to Sora was only her decision. She was sure she could handle it on her own. She worked and studied a lot. Sometimes the work was difficult, and at these moments the girl remembered Sajun 1,000 times, but firmly drove away these thoughts. Even when Sora was sick, the girl abandoned all her affairs and ran to the hospital with her daughter. Time passed, and the desire to contact Sajun grew, but it was too late. I remembered moments with Sora. The girl was kind and sympathetic, but sometimes her powers got out of control, and then it seemed to the mother that the whole world was looking at her child with an unfavorable look. The girl decided that she would protect her daughter herself. Talking to Sora, asked not to show her powers to anyone except her mother, and the girl thought that it would be their secret with her mother. Smiling, Mom said that it would be their special secret just for two. The girl was crying, relaxing and giving free rein to emotions. The young man's father said that the girl was her daughter, but she was also Sajun's daughter and was now grandfather's granddaughter, and he asked me to trust them and let go of this heavy burden. The young man's father asked him to share the hardships of life with them, because Sajun also wanted this. At that moment, Sajun was sitting with his daughter and watching her play. Mom came into the room and the girl ran to her. Seeing her mother, the girl ran up to her and asked if she was crying and wiping her eyes. The girl explained that everything was fine. The young man was surprised by the girl's reaction, and when he saw his father, he looked at him with the same evil look, but he assured that he had not said anything to the girl. Yoonhee smiled at Sajun and hugged her daughter, saying that everything was fine. The father looked at the guys and asked them what they planned to do. The young man was surprised and at first did not understand what his father meant, but then explained to him, looking at and Sora, that they planned to get hunting licenses. The girl also looked at Sajun and holding Sora in her arms looked surprised. The ruins of the world. Ice floes stuck out from everywhere, and our hero made his way through the snow and blizzard. There was not a soul on the street. Ahead of him, he saw Sora sitting on the ground, an adult Sora. The girl asked why and why the young man saved her. The hero could not utter a word. Whether he was physically unable to speak, whether he was making up an excuse, he could only stand and look at Sora with his eyes. Sora, concentrating her magic in her hands, told her father, with anger in her voice, that he considered her pathetic. Then the girl confessed that she despised Lee Sajun, that is, him, her father. And after that, the daughter attacked her father with ice magic, which she owned. Shards of ice rained down on the hero, and then he woke up, because the voice was calling him Dad. Then the hero reported that he had already woken up. Sora was sitting on his bed, and the hero himself was trying to move away from the dream that had just ended. Sora woke up her father and asked him to get up, because the sun had already risen and sent greetings. The young man, getting out of bed, saw looking in and asked her if he had slept for so long. But the girl just offered him to take a shower and sit down to eat. Today it was possible to take a break from training. Yoonhee asked Sajun if he had nightmares, because the young man did not sleep well last night. And at that moment, the hero was trying to remember what he had dreamed last night. Lying in bed, our hero looked at his bank account, which had about $250 left. Money was running out. Sajun knew that when they got hunting licenses, he and would have a small income, but it would not be immediately, considering that before the certification it is necessary to eat something. Interrupting his thoughts, Yoonhee wanted to come into the room, asking what Sajun and Sora were doing. The happy hero replied to Yoonhee that he had Sora therapy, to lie on a soft bed with his dear Sora, what the young man could still dream of. At this moment, the hero was rubbing the cheeks of his cute daughter, and was standing next to the bed and watching the picture. Without thinking twice, she asked the guys to get up, because they had just had breakfast. The girl threw the guys out of bed and hitting the floor. The young man saw $1 million on his account. He received a transfer from Ko Hwin. Also received a translation. The girl answered the phone and there a female voice asked if it was Hwin. The same in turn found out if the money had come to her sister. The girl asked where Hveen had so much money from, and the girl said that she had messed up these in the dungeon. Then Hveen informed the guys that since they had not yet become hunters and had not received a license, members of her guild made these translations for them. The girl asked what messed up meant, and Sajin explained that this is when they collect the cores of defeated monsters and other useful bonuses from their bodies. Ko Hveen heard Sajin and asked if the young man had also received a transfer. The monsters turned out to be completely ordinary, so the guys didn't earn much. Sajin replied that 1 million was also a decent amount. Hveen reported that licensed hunters receive many times more. The girl kept a booklet at hand and informed the guys that the hunter exam was coming soon, and they were supposed to turn it in this month. The hunter's exam exists to evaluate the abilities of people who have chosen the path of the hunter for themselves and allow them to become full-fledged hunters. The exam consisted of 3 parts, as the delivery of the rites, the written part, the individual exam, the final test. Those who have passed the test and received a license are granted not only the right to use all the advantages of the profession, the same loot, for example, but also recognition as official hunters. After telling about this, Hweon asked about the date of the exams in order to come to support Yoonhee and Sajun, and she was also ready to look after Sora while she was there. The young man, listening to the conversation of the girls, because it was on speakerphone, thought that the real Ko Hveen was very different from the one he remembered. Maybe the girl was pursuing some ulterior motives. For example, the desire to attract them to your guild. In fact, it sounds tempting, Sajin thought. After all, this guild was in the top of the best guilds in Korea. But the young man decided not to get ahead of himself with his thoughts. After the conversation, the young man thought that he could no longer think about every amount of money spent. There was still a lot of time before the exam, and after exchanging glances, the same thought came to the heroes. After looking at their daughter, they wanted to go together to get clothes for Sora. The girl was happy. The day of the exam came and Sora was left alone with Ko Hveen. Sitting in the girl's arms, she waved to her parents and smiled, wishing good luck on the exam. They smiled back at their daughter and also waved goodbye. Hveen was thinking about how Sora was wearing new clothes, although any outfit looked great on the girl. Yoonhee looked at Sajun and asked if the young man could cope with the written part, because he had trained so much that he didn't have time to prepare for the written part at all. It won't be possible to catch up quickly. The young man smiled at Un and said that he would cope, because he had prepared in advance. To himself, the hero thought that before returning to the past, he had failed this exam countless times. He always got the maximum points for the written part, as if he knew the answers in advance. But due to lack of strength, he always failed the second stage. When he did get a license, it was possible to understand by his appearance at what price the hero got it, that he was all exhausted and bruised from fighting. Looking at Yoonhee, the young man could see that she was very worried. It would be bad if the girl had to take the exam in such a state, and the young man decided to offer her to argue. Then Sajin offered to bet her on who would get the highest score for the written part, and the one who lost would fulfill the winner's wish. Yoonhee saw that since Sajin was arguing with her, the young man was confident of his victory. Yoonhee agreed to the argument with her eyes burning with delight. After that, she asked Sajin to get ready to fulfill the wish. The young man believed that the more you brag, the more you will regret it later. The girl, of course, did not take his words seriously. The operation to prevent Sora from becoming a villain has officially begun. In order for Sora not to have to go through 5 misfortunes in the future, it is necessary to lay the foundation for avoiding the events preceding them. So the parents will make sure that she will be happy. Young and Sajin were firmly confident in each other and their capabilities. Our hero was ready to make his daughter's life only better. The House of the Koryo Sword. The young man informed the elderly warrior that the certification of hunters, which he was talking about, was about to begin. The old man, rubbing his mustache, was thinking about his own. The young man, an employee of the security service, reported that it was necessary to prepare the car. The old man reported that this was not necessary, it was not so far to go, and he would prefer to walk. Everyone was congratulated on the successful completion of the first test. The guys passed the written test. It wasn't too difficult for Sajin and Un. The examiner reported that there was an artificial monster behind him, imitating those with whom the hunters would have to fight. The staff called him a scarecrow. The stage was considered passed if the participants cut off the monster for a certain time and did not get serious injuries. They will be watched by representatives of various guilds. This is a great opportunity to prove yourself in battle and get into the guild. If there are no more questions, then it was possible to start the exam. The first participant from the D team starts the exam. The first participant did not pass. The next command is D. the 6th participant. Next came the 12th participant. All participants lost to the Scarecrow, which defeated one less by another. Representatives from the guild believed that there was no one with outstanding skills. One of them talked about what he could understand when the hunters failed after a couple of seconds, but giving up before the fight was too much. Representatives of the guild sat and watched the fight, choosing for themselves new participants whom they could lure to themselves. The woman turned her attention to the man who was a holy sword master from the house of the Koryo sword. It was his first time as an observer at the exam, as one of the representatives of the guild noticed. Calm Dream. On the day the world collapsed, he saved humanity from absolute annihilation. The guild founded by him, the House of the Koryo Sword, is known all over the world. His skills are not inferior to fame. Starting a conversation about hunters first of all, they remember who Sonya is. It seemed that this time it was possible not to even look at the participants. And everyone agreed with this opinion. Talented people will be invited to the Guild of the Master of the Sword. All representatives believed. Would anyone choose their guild instead of the most famous guild in the world? Some wanted to know why Komsong decided to appear here for the first time. Because he had never appeared here before. Why there was such a change. Someone heard that he came here at the request of his granddaughter, who was in the news. As soon as this was said, the granddaughter called her grandfather, the very same person, and reported that she was here. Komsung's granddaughter was Ko Hween. Coming with Sora, Grandpa asked Hween what kind of child it was, and then the girl said that it was the daughter of friends, and she looked after her while her parents were taking the exam. A man with a stone face looked at Sora, and she looked at him curiously, and then called him Santa Claus, because Kom's son had white hair and a white beard. The man introduced himself by name and said that, unfortunately, there was no Santa Claus. The girl was upset to report that her name was Sora. All the observers from the guilds admired this cute moment. Ko Hween asked her grandfather what he thought about the examinees, and he replied that hunters were no good. But the one who had just finished was somewhat interesting, reported Kom's son. Sora pressed against the glass and watched what was happening. Mom came out for the exam. The examiner reported that the 28th participant from the D team entered the fight, and the time allotted to him was 16 seconds. And having fought the monster, the girl won. The young man praised Uni for the fact that she coped with the task perfectly and passed it. The girl replied that everything was thanks to hard training and wished good luck to Sojun. There was a scarecrow in front of the young man, and our hero was ready for battle. He took his spear and activated mana. I decided that I would finish as soon as possible. The examiner commanded that the 29th participant of the D team came out to fight. The scarecrow, flashing its eyes, looked at the hero, and the examiner commanded that the test of the young man began. At that moment the robot rushed to attack our hero. The young man stood and looked at the robot, and the representatives of the guild did not understand what was wrong with him and why he was standing rooted to the spot. Was it because of fear he could not move? Some decided and continued to observe the situation. He's analyzing the enemy and the situation right now, thought Comer and his granddaughter. Having passed this test countless times in his past life, he learned the weak point of the scarecrow. When he rushed to attack the hero and loaded his fist directly into the young man, but missed, and our hero escaped the blow by rolling on his back under the robot itself. This is a huge hole in the armor that imitates a real golem, and he found a weak spot. Everyone knows that the weak point of the scarecrow is the joints. Why is Sojun just dodging and that's it? Ko Hween thought. The young man was dodging again, and the girl was thinking that maybe the guy had another strategy in mind. Then Ko Hween and Komsong, watching the young man closely, saw how he jumped on the robot and hit his weak spot. Having picked up the protection, the young man got to the filling of the robot and tore out its core. All the guild observers were shocked by what Sojun had done. Komsong and his granddaughter, watching this battle, were also very surprised. The core of the effigy was in the hands of our hero, and the robot, howling, crumbled, and the hero landed smoothly on his feet using mana. The examiner announced the Team D and the 29th participant. The time was 14 seconds and it was a victory. All the other hunters, looking at the young man, thought about how incredible he was. Sojun ran up to Yunhei and they shook hands. Komsong reported that for the sake of this man, his granddaughter called him. Ko Hween said that this guy was irresistible. Comdream said that it was one thing to discover a weakness, but from beginning to end to think through a strategy how to pull out the core, it was a talent. Komsun looked at the smiling young man. The most delicious snacks and dishes were on the table and the guys were congratulated on passing the exam. They probably got hungry after the exams. Usually such events pulled out all the forces. Sora was also nearby and looked at the table full of goodies with eyes sparkling with happiness. Ko Hween held a feast in honor of Sojun and Inai. The girl said that she pays for everything and therefore asked the heroes to fly into the food, smiling at both and pointing at the table. Yoonhee, sitting next to her daughter across from Hween, reported that it seemed to her that the restaurant was very expensive. But the girl said that everything had already been paid for and that she would treat her when she became a hunter. Eunhee, confused by her conversations, said that the next time the food was on her, Sojun watched their conversation from the side and tried to analyze it. The young man thought that the girl was going to invite them to her guild and decided for himself that perhaps he was too suspicious of Hween. Sojun believed that a good attitude towards him, along with a sense of gratitude, also causes anxiety, as if there is some hidden motive in this. Not only because he remembered what Hween was like before returning to the past, but also because Kam Song is her grandfather. It seemed that the girl had no hidden intentions and perhaps our hero was overly wound up by virtue of being in the past. Here his thoughts about the girl were interrupted by Hween herself, saying that she was interested in something and she wanted to find out from Sojun. Sojun listened to her attentively and then Hween asked about the weapons that the guys used and asked where it was from. The young man decided that if he introduced them to each other, it would only be a matter of time before Kam Sun and Kang Chul got to know each other. The first-class hunter of the first generation is Kam Song and the best blacksmith in the world is Kang Kal. But this was going to happen much later in the future. Hween, who was looking at him, was all attention. Sitting in the room and looking at the phone, the hero was thinking, and then Un came up to him and put a cold bottle scared our hero. Although the girl just wanted to ask if the young man was very busy. Then he was embarrassed to say that Hween had asked for something and so he wrote her a message. The young man introduced Hween to Kang Kal because the girl wanted to change weapons. So she wondered who made their weapons. The young man thought about the butterfly effect for a long time and therefore began to worry very much. Un looked at the young man and as if reading his thoughts asked what he thought about her, because Un considered the girl a good person. This surprised Sojun. When the young man heard her request, doubts and worries overwhelmed Sojun. But, as Un said, the girl was a good person. Not a bit of evil intentions, only good deeds. It wasn't the Hween who was drowning in a sea of problems. The young man believed that she could be trusted. The young man was sitting in front of the computer and therefore Un asked if he was preparing for the final standings. Sojun reported that he knew the venue and therefore offered to check the situation in advance. May their exam go well. Then Un decided to thank Sojun for helping her countless times and for the wait. The young man joked with Un that the girl had drunk a lot, but she was serious. Sojun didn't know why he was so grateful, but he assured Yoonhee that they would have time to talk about it after the test. Sojun believed that with their skills, they would pass right away. The young man could not have imagined that this dialogue would lead to events that did not exist before his return to the past. Mount Kunek, the last stage of becoming hunters, clearing an entry-level dungeon in a team with random people. The final score results from the ability to work as a team. Teamwork determines whether they will receive a reward or not. In turn, the size of the reward also depends on the score. The examiner called the participants. Lee Sojun, Ho Man-soo and Kang Di-ho were in the team. Everyone was in place. Now the team has to go to clean up the dungeon. The passage time is 3 hours. Only one type of weapon can be used. Consumables are also available to participants and they had half an hour to discuss before the exam begins. Ho Man-soo is a magician, a rare gift that is valued in the guilds, but the young man did not remember it. But our hero has heard a lot about How Di-ho, a hunter who preferred his own fists to swords or bows. The hero met a hunter who in the future is called the king of hand-to-hand combat. But it didn't matter, the main thing was whether they could all become a team. Before the exam began, it was necessary to decide who was in what positions and discuss the tactics of the battle. Sojun suggested and asked if anyone had any suggestions. They were still busy with their own affairs and absolutely did not listen to the hero. Apparently Sojun was offered to become their tutor. Group D is the 12th team and the start of the overall standings has gone. The system reported that the hero had entered the dungeon and that it was an entry-level quest. Dungeon, to clean up the ant nest on Mount Kunek. That was the name of today's mission that the heroes had to do. Sojun's team sorted out the positions. Ho Min-soo is in the rear as he has a large attack radius. Sojun will fight and give instructions from the center. Kang Di-ho is fighting on the front line. People panic when they first get into the dungeon and immediately the very first one asked for protection, addressing Sojun. Then the young man explained that they were not here to protect Mansu. The young man shouted about how important he was and that their heads would fly if he died. Kang Di-ho offered to go without Minsu and Sojun replied that the two of them were enough for an entry-level dungeon and asked to go already. Minsu, standing at the entrance to the dungeon, did not believe that the guys were really going to go and ran after them, asking them to wait for him. There were a lot of chains on the young man and Sajun asked to take them off and give them to the observer, because their rattling would give the monsters the location of the team. The young man was afraid that his jewelry could be stolen, because they were very expensive. It was a classic exam life situation where egoists don't think about their team members and their role in it. Standing behind them, the observer reported that the instructions of the leader were mandatory for all team members, and they were required to leave their jewelry outside the dungeon so that in the future they would not be discovered and killed by monsters. Minsu was unhappy and thought that everyone was against him, and they also wanted to give themselves points at his expense. He angered Sajun so much that he concentrated his mana in his legs and turned it against Minsu and taught him a lesson so that the guy stayed on the floor and looked no longer at Sajun, but at his spear in front of his face. Sajun repeated the last time and asked Minsu to take off all the jewelry. Clear and confident movements, with no chance of a quick reaction. The young man accurately calculated the distance to the target. The observer assessed all the actions in the room. He had heard that among the participants there was one who scored the maximum number of points on the individual test in the shortest time, and these rumors were not lying. Sajun walked through the dungeon and thought that for all the long time that they had been here, they had not met a single ant. There were only remnants of moss around, which they ate. Examiners may specifically create atypical situations to assess the resourcefulness of participants. But even so, and then Sajun's thoughts were interrupted by Diho's words that there was something strange ahead. In the dungeon, the young men discovered a chasm. Sajun, kneeling down, had never seen anything like this when cleaning ant nests. An atypical situation would be much easier, the hero thought. Then one of the participants, Minsu, began to fall into the abyss. Sajun asked him not to move and rushed to help, but Minsu was being dragged somewhere, but the guys could not understand what he was talking about. At that moment, a huge ant appeared from the abyss and Minsu asked to save him. In front of them was an ant lion. And unable to hold on to the spear that Sajun Minsu held out, the guy fell straight down, and the guys decided to go straight inside, going down the walls of the abyss. The observer, sitting on the edge, said that the guys could not go there, it was beyond the test. The system said that the young men were the first to enter the secret dungeon. The beginning of a special quest. A secret dungeon. It was necessary to clean up the ant lion's lair. At that moment, they descended right into the very lair. Sajun asked Diho if he had heard about the special notification, and they entered the secret dungeon. The story begins its exciting development. The narration focuses readers' attention on the character who makes the score. Here is the number 1034 changed to 1035. Apparently, he was doing some kind of exercise. The audience could draw such a conclusion based on the fact that the hero raised both hands up and clapped them. In the next episode, it became known that the action was carried out inside a building, where sunlight fell and illuminated the interior space. Among him, you could see several characters who surrounded one without clothes. The guys were in a fairly large room, which was filled with various furniture, school chairs and tables, large tanks and signs. The overweight guy was doing physical exercises. He jumped up and clapped his hands, while simultaneously keeping score, which went from 1036 to 1037. There was a wall behind him, so, apparently, they were on the porch or entrance to the building, the road to which was equipped with large gray stone slabs. Finally, the story introduced readers to this somewhat mysterious character. As it turned out, his name was Cha-Mu-Yul. He had black hair that was parted on the left side. The long side slightly covered his thick eyebrows, which on this episode gave him an excited appearance. The next picture was about how two guys filmed a character with excess weight. There was an evil grin on their smiles. The first of them, who had brown hair with long bangs that covered his forehead, burst out laughing and said out loud that everyone around him should look at the shaking legs of their buddy. The second hero picked up the joyful and malicious mood of his friend and, also through laughter, said that in any case, in his personal opinion, it was quite a funny sight. Suddenly, the overweight character fell to his feet and began to pitifully swallow air in order to restore the breathing that had strayed from excessive load on his body. Cha-Mu-Yul lowered his head and searched afterwards. He was so tired that readers could see his heavy breaths and exhalations. The guys who were standing in a pile opposite him stared questioningly. One of them put his hands in his pockets and uttered a strange sound that conveyed his surprise or bewilderment. The other, who was sitting, had black hair that was cut in the shape of a pot, swiftly flashed his evil gaze in the direction of Cha-Mu-Yul, and the third just opened his mouth and watched him. According to the following episode, a stranger took a step on the gray stone slabs and laughed. In his opinion, the situation was similar to the fact that a guy who fell to the floor and was breathing heavily from physical activity was in trouble because he was overweight, to which he made it clear that he could still continue. The boy lowered his head dejectedly, watching the speaker from under his brows, who was already standing in front of his face, which was completely wet with sweat. The stranger had brown hair neatly parted on the left. Apparently, as readers could assume, there were schoolchildren in front of them, because this guy was wearing black pants and a gray t-shirt, over which he was wearing a white long-sleeve shirt. He gave a negative answer to the guy he was looking down on, and said that, in his opinion, it was obvious that he was experiencing difficulties. Moreover, after a short period of time, the character asked him a question. The guy was interested in whether he had a desire to lose weight, although the tone of his voice gave the impression that he insisted on it more, as if it was not even a request, but an incentive to action. In the next episode, a schoolboy with a terrible character put a bucket with unknown contents in front of Cha Mu-yeol. Aloud he uttered his request, although from his words it was an instruction or a wish, according to which the guy would have to eat again. His gaze was definitely serious, his black eyes were like an abyss, and the shadow that fell on the upper part of his face emphasized the expression of facial expressions, which allowed readers to compare him with a predator that hunted its prey. The schoolboy watched his interlocutor expectantly, and after a short period of time, I told him to start eating. Why did he get everything in his eyes? Large drops of sweat trickled down Cha Mu-yeol's face, and the irises of the eyes almost disappeared altogether because the whites filled the surface, which only emphasized the frightened expression of the guy's face, who continued to breathe heavily. The corners of his eyes drooped involuntarily, and in the next episode, the character even pulled both of his hands, which were shaking because they were approaching the unknown contents of the iron bucket, when suddenly unknown sounds were heard. However, readers could not discern what exactly Cha Mu-yeol was doing, because his silhouette was hidden by the tall figure of one of the schoolchildren. That's just the audience was shown his wide-open eyes, on which large tears began to appear. Suddenly, other guys entered the dialogue. One of them, a guy with brown hair pulled back in different directions, covered his mouth with his right hand and said through a terrible laugh that it was just disgusting. His friend, the hero with the black hair in the form of a pot and in a blue jacket, picked up the mood of the others and also burst into laughter, when suddenly the chief of them pushed Cha Mu-yeol so hard that he flew back, opening his mouth in surprise and an involuntary sigh. The others approached the fallen guy and gave him a threatening order to continue eating the strange contents that were in the iron bucket. The student began to cry and silently continued to listen to the guys and wait for what they would do next in relation to him. He tried to cover his head with both hands, probably hiding his tears in this way, and mentally asked for forgiveness. Two characters stood over the overweight boy while the other two filmed what they were doing on the phone. In the next frame, the story tells readers about the thoughts of Cha Mu-yeol. As it became known, from the very moment of his birth, he considered himself unworthy and owed something to others, as if the guy was different from his peers. He was crying, always, and the reason was that his entourage thought the same way. But everything has changed. As the new episode shows, the main character has changed a lot, and even for the better. There was no longer an overweight guy. Now he had a toned and muscular body, and all because he pulled himself together and started playing sports. For example, Cha Mu-yeol puts his left hand back and tries to make a swinging motion. On his face, which was wet with sweat, his black eyebrows were strained, which gave him a concentrated appearance. The main character made a firm decision to conquer this world. When suddenly, in the next episode, he suddenly opened his eyes, as if waking up from some kind of dream. After a short period of time, it became clear to readers that everyone had come up with this, although they could make a rather audacious assumption that this was his goal, because they were shown the same chubby schoolboy who fell again, thanks to which he had just not made one serious mistake. The guy sat down and began to think about what he had just almost done. Large drops of sweat appeared on his face, because he understood that it was as if fate had saved him by giving him another chance. A chance to change everything. His snow-white skin has acquired red spots from indignation and misunderstanding. He cast a serious look down while simultaneously asking aloud what had just happened. Cha Mu-yeol cursed at the top of his voice, trying to come to a sober state in this way. As it turned out, the first thought that settled in his mind told him that the main character had just risen from the dead. He raised both hands and watched them, when suddenly his silhouette appeared from above behind him, only he was different from him. This Cha Mu-yeol was muscular and slender. Apparently, he joined the soul of an MMA athlete. The next episode tells curious readers about a fierce fight between two wrestlers. One of them, a man with dark hair shaved at the temples and the back of his head, and with an overgrown beard, dealt a crushing blow to his opponent. He was fighting a single combat with a character who was slightly below him. Due to a rough push, this guy turned his head slightly because his opponent managed to hit him. However, it did not prevent readers from describing him as a dark-haired handsome man. Suddenly, the referee's voice rang out, who announced that a very strong blow from Makhmudov had been taken by Cha Mu-yeol, but they gave him advice so that the guy would continue to keep in the same spirit and not focus attention on it. The big ring was brightly lit, making even the spectators behind it could not be seen because they were immersed in darkness. However, they continued to twist with all the might of their voice the words of support in relation to their favorites. As it turned out, according to the referee of the duel, the main character really managed to improve his defense. Readers could also notice this, because despite the fact that Makhmudov continued to deliver crushing blows at a rapid pace, he failed to break him. Cha Mu-yeol stood like a wall. Not even a single muscle on his back tensed from their intensity and strength. Suddenly, in the next episode, the main character's opponent made an uppercut on the left this time. The referee was still commenting on the actions in the ring, with the help of which readers could familiarize themselves with the terminology of the fights. Makhmudov managed to slow down Cha Mu-yeol slightly because he, holding both hands at the ready, raised his head up, trying to dodge in this way. That's just the judge said that the guy got hit in the jaw. Now the main character stood in a protective pose, turning his head to the right side and covering it with both hands, which he raised, thus opening a view of the unprotected torso. At the next moment, Makhmudov did not think for long, because he began to attack. After that, the referee again informed the curious fans of this fight that the fighter continued to beat Cha Mu-yeol without a break. Suddenly, the pumped-up athlete lunged forward, causing a small stream of air to rise behind his hind leg, which provoked the movement of dust. Makhmudov dealt a crushing blow to the main character, severely wounding him. He, in turn, did not have time to react or group properly, so he just started falling backwards. Readers could see the blood on his face, which began to flow smoothly through his body. The story described his glass eyes, the iris and pupil of which began to rise smoothly upwards. Apparently, the man stopped understanding something. Cha Mu-yeol imagined how he, the judge, raised his left hand in a gesture that he had won, from which a bright and radiant smile appeared on the face of the main character. Even readers could notice and note for themselves that a gold medal hung on his chest. As it became known after a short period of time, the man wished with all his heart to become the strongest. In the next episode, he and another character with gray hair took photos, posing for her and hugging. It was the signing of an exclusive contract with Cha Mu-yeol. And in the new picture, the main character dealt a crushing blow to his opponent using his left hand. And he succeeded. According to his thought processes, the guy always believed that he could do it. Suddenly, the story began to tell again around the duel between him and Makhmudov, allowing once again to show how beautifully the second man won by hitting him in the jaw. Why did Cha Mu-yeol freeze, opening his eyes wide and relaxing his mouth? In his opinion, it was a fatal weakness, and she finally opened up. That's just all that readers have just seen was a dream. The main character folded both hands on the school desk and suddenly raised his head. His mouth was drooling, and he asked a question out loud. He was interested in what had just happened and whether he had missed anything important. An aura thickened around him, as if the guy had just done something forbidden. He was dressed in a school uniform, which consisted of a white shirt, a gray vest with a black tie and a jacket. In the next episode, the picture took him from a larger angle, allowing him to see the reaction of his neighbor, a guy with long black bangs that covered his forehead. However, this did not prevent the audience from seeing a puzzled expression of facial expressions on his face. He looked at his classmate and closely followed his actions. But Cha Mu-yeol was trying to come to his senses at that moment. At first, the student stared somewhere in front of him, and then he turned his gaze to his plump palms. The guy gulped air greedily to catch his breath from a bad dream, which to some extent contained his true desire. In the new picture, the character folded the fist of his right hand and leaned it against his forehead. His face was covered with beads of sweat again, and the student himself gave himself up to his reflections. Based on his thoughts, it all turned out to be true. He was reborn. However, in the next second, he gave a negative answer, thus canceling everything previously said, because it was not about him, but about Cha Mu-yeol, who had a beautiful and slender, pumped-up body. Now his ghost was sitting at the next desk of the main character. The story tells readers how two souls appeared in the air. They flew over the head of the main character and had his face. The first is either confused or scared, because she pursed her lips and strained her thick black eyebrows, and the second, on the contrary, is dissatisfied. The guy describes that they became one. An aura thickened around him, taking on a dark hue as if it was pressing on him, forcing him to make some decision or draw a conclusion. According to his thoughts of Cha Mu-yeol, he remembered that the memory of another soul was an important component. The schoolboy cast a swift and wary glance somewhere in front of him and began to remember something. As it turned out, pictures surfaced in his head that described the actions around his second life. For example, in one of them, the main character dealt a crushing blow to his opponent, forced him to turn his head to the right side because the push hit his face. On the second, Cha Mu-yeol was jumping rope. On the third, he was looking down at a lying opponent who had just lost to him. Only, as it became known after a short period of time, he did not even remember the original owner of this body. According to the new episodes, the student was lying on the cold floor in the corridor of his school. He was watched by his classmates, who were squatting or standing next to lockers. In other words, according to Cha Mu-yeol, now he had to share his memories with him. He looked at his palms again, causing his face to be covered with beads of sweat again. Even the student's gaze became more focused. After a short period of time, the main character acquainted readers with the following information. Cha Mu-yeol was an MMA athlete. In the new episode, the guy got slapped on the left side of his chubby face. The jolt was so strong that it made him turn away. As it turned out, the actions returned to real life. In it, a schoolboy with black hair in the shape of a pot asked the others aloud if they had seen his punch. He said that if you hit in this way, you can get a concussion. His neighbor, a character in a gray t-shirt, over which was a white school shirt, asked in a surprised tone of voice whether it was true or not. That's just the one. In turn, added that for the best effect it is better to do it using a fist. When the second guy gave a positive answer, he suddenly pointed his index finger at Cha Mu-yeol and exclaimed that he was apparently all right. The main character at this moment was sitting silently at his desk, as if he had frozen. The character probably didn't know how to react properly. A schoolboy with brown hair and a white shirt laughed and said that his non-reacting classmate was still supposedly coming to his senses, even though he had just been hit. The character in the blue coffee scratched his head in a gesture that he was thinking about something, and he will continue to talk, making the audacious assumption that Cha Mu-yeol was really cool. At this very moment, the main character touched the cheek of the same name with his left hand and looked at them. Suddenly, after a long silence, a guy with a black pot on his head finally entered the dialogue. He strained his broad eyebrows and glanced at his neighbor, at the same time telling him that the schoolboy was embarrassing him. He then directed his eyes full of anger at the protagonist he had just scolded and asked him a question. As it turned out, he was wondering why Cha Mu-yeol was staring at him with his mouth open. And after a short period of time, he wondered if he really wanted something worse to be done to him, which, in fact, they did in the next second. The guy threw away the desk where the main character was sitting, which caused him to pull away and fall to the floor. The push was so strong that the student even slipped slightly. Suddenly, his friend appeared behind the bully, who asked him a question, simultaneously pulling a satisfied smile from ear to ear. As it turned out, based on the remark of the first, Cha Mu-yeol's face exasperated him. That's all. That was the reason for his ill-mannered behavior. However, in his opinion, everything was fine with the main character. At this moment, the character was mentally trying to verify the truthfulness of what had just happened to him. He was sitting with both hands on the cold floor, supporting his back in this way. There was a certain bewilderment on his frightened face. That's just such a detached and incomprehensible reaction angered a schoolboy in a blue jacket. Readers saw how he strained his eyebrows and wrinkled his nose, saying out loud that Cha Mu-yeol continued to look at him as if he had lost his mind. This was the reason for his next act. The guy again treated his classmate badly. That's just the main character was thinking that it wasn't painful at all. In the new episode, he was lying with his arms and legs spread out in different directions, which made his figure look like a star shape. In his opinion, it was impossible. A guy with brown hair and a white school shirt burst out laughing. He said out loud that he felt sorry for Cha Mu-yeol because in his place he would have just faked a faint. But he said it with a satisfied grin, which even made his fox eyes shine. His interlocutor told him that the character was constantly making noise, but now they had to go to the dining room. The two guys began to gradually move away, and now, when their silhouettes were already at the front door, the main character called out to them, thus forcing them to turn around. The faces of both characters froze with bewilderment. As it turned out, Cha Mu-yeol took a fighting stance, which was also done by his second personality, whose spirit was standing behind him. The guy addressed his abusers aloud, letting them know that they could hit him again. He closed his eyebrows and heated his gaze, as if he really meant it. He was being watched by everyone else in the classroom. For a certain period of time, the students froze either from amazement or from a funny situation. Suddenly, the character in the blue jacket asked if he had imagined it, to which the second picked up his mysterious mood and also asked if he had dreamed it all. The schoolboy with a black pot on his head took a couple of steps in the direction of his classmate, who had just been inspired, and asked him a question, according to which, what the overweight guy wanted to get or prove. And he, in turn, made a bold assumption and said it out loud, pulled a satisfied smile. He wondered if his interlocutor was afraid. That's just the character just laughed and retold his question. However, after a short period of time, he made a swinging motion with his left hand and shouted at the top of his voice that he would destroy him today. Hatred and malice were reflected on his face because of his closed eyebrows and bared teeth. When his fist approached the main character, something suddenly surprised him, or rather even alerted him, because his pupils and the iris of his eyes had shrunk to an unthinkable size. As it became known, he struck him on the right cheek, but Cha Mu-yeol did not react to it in any way. The main character was completely calm. Moreover, even his fair skin did not turn red. What cannot be said about a guy with a black pot on his head, because he was covered with small droplets of cold sweat. The overweight student began to burst out laughing at the hilarious situation. A thought rang in his head, according to which they had another chance. The next moment, the guy in the blue jacket asked him a question, wondering what was the reason for his strange reaction. That is, laughter. And the character at that moment was thinking that people who had previously made fun of this body would be punished. How suddenly readers could notice how Cha Mu-yeol swung, which caused his opponent's face to express some degree of fear. He managed to deliver a crushing blow, because a schoolboy with a black pot on his head did not have time to react and dodge, so he literally flew backwards. Now the guy has a chance to take revenge. The story described how all the classmates froze in amazement. Each of them opened his mouth as if they did not expect such a maneuver from the main character, who was overweight. At that moment, the push and pressure provoked the appearance of a stream of air, which, apparently, to some extent helped Cha Mu-yeol to fly away in the opposite direction from his opponent. Moreover, the story described his red-skinned face, which stopped in front of the legs of another schoolboy. Unexpectedly for the readers and the main character, there was a sound, after which Cha Mu-yeol opened his black eyes wide. As it became known after a short period of time, a window appeared in front of the student, in which his personal characteristics appeared. For example, height of 175 centimeters, weight of 173.5 kilograms, 18 years of age, even the city he lived in and his fighting style. On the right side there were various types of strikes and counterattack abilities. The guy indulged in his thoughts. According to them, in his previous life he was very weak. He had a weak jaw, but now he had a chance to turn all his memories into reality. He imagined how to strike his opponent again in the fighting ring. And then, in reality, attention is transferred to a schoolboy with brown hair and a white shirt, who looked down at his friend with horror. The next moment, his face was covered with cold sweat, because he cursed out loud and made the assumption that it was all like a dream. The student cast his gaze at the main character, who at that moment was thinking about the status window after waking up, which made him wonder if it was true or not. There was also a look of amazement and surprise on his face. The mission window he saw at the beginning brought him back to his rival. Cha Mu-yeol pulled a smile from ear to ear and strained his fist, laughing suddenly. A frightened schoolboy looked at him, according to whom the main character looked very scary. He even bared his teeth and strained his eyebrows, which greatly emphasized his small wrinkles around his eyes. The overweight guy was taking steps in the direction of his opponent, who literally froze, when suddenly he decided to speak, trying to seem brave. The schoolboy, in a demanding tone of voice, made it clear to his approaching classmate that he did not even dare to touch him. Moreover, he should stay away from him. Suddenly, Cha Mu-yeol, whose face expressed disgust, entered the dialogue. He asked a question to a guy with brown hair, according to which the main character wanted to know if his classmate liked to eat solid food. However, there was a stunned reaction in Togo, because he narrowed one eye and asked the question again. And the main character, slightly tilting his head, explained that in the future it would be difficult for a character in a white shirt to chew. Moreover, there was a high probability that he would even lose a few teeth. However, he, in turn, viciously swore and tried to stop the threat from the speaker. Suddenly, the story informed readers that a combat mission had begun, according to which the main character had to fight with hooligans. The guy grabbed his classmate with brown hair and pulled his collar, rejected him, looked at him questioningly. After a short period of time, the picture showed the audience that the mysterious task was for Cha Mu-yeol to collect 30 teeth from a school bandit, for which he would receive a reward of 20 points. The main character spoke out loud, telling his opponent that he would not stop. As it turned out, the combat mission was already completed on 2/30. Therefore, he swung and shouted at the top of his voice that it was time to take the third one first. From his strong blow, the schoolboy even got blood. However, he made a firm decision to become a champion. The story continues its rapid development. This time the story is about two fighters who are fighting in the ring. It was Makhmudov and the main character. The first of them struck Cha Mu-yeol, causing his nose to bleed. The opponent forced the guy to step back a little because the push hit his face hard. The referee shouted at the top of his voice, thus attracting the attention of the audience. In his opinion, it was a perfect ending and a very dangerous fight, but amazing at the same time. Everyone was rooting for Makhmudov's fatal elbow strike. The judge in the ring raised both hands, crossing them, which meant the end of the fight. At this moment, the winner approached the viewer and stood in a pose that symbolized his strength and power over the main character. The confrontation was over. That's just, as it became known based on the thoughts of Cha Mu-yeol, from the beginning of the fight, the match had to fail. The reason was that in Makhmudov, who at that time was rejoicing at the victory, spreading his arms in different directions. The muscles were in shape thanks to steroids. It was all a hoax, but the character still wanted other fighters to be in his place, because he himself felt like a scapegoat. At that moment, the guy was lying under Yves. He was dressed in a hospital uniform, covered with a white blanket. Suddenly he opened his eyes and began to observe what was around him. When suddenly someone touched his forehead with his hand, which greatly frightened Cha Mu-yeol, so much so that his eyes widened to an unprecedented size. The stranger called him by name and asked him a question, according to which he wanted to know what it was. After a short period of time, the story introduced readers to a new character. He was a man with gray hair and stubble. He pulled a satisfied grin and looked at the lying guy. As it turned out, he hoped that Cha Mu-yeol would do what he wanted. But the guy didn't listen to him. Although, as the stranger put it, he didn't care. In the next episode, viewers found out why he was so happy. The reason was simple and obvious. It consisted in the fact that thanks to the main character, the image of a man became clean again. Moreover, the character even thanked him. He leaned slightly towards Cha Mu-yeol to show him his phone, which had some kind of video on the screen. As it became known to readers, it was about the conference of CEO Jang Yong-gil. It was the same character who visited the main character. He was dressed in a strict black suit and was holding some paper in his hands. The character said out loud that everyone's hope, that is, Cha Mu-yeol, may have been the first Korean to become a WFC champion. That's just Jang Yong-gil was forced to reluctantly inform the audience that the fighter had left MMA. From this phrase, the main character's eyes seemed to come out of their orbits, because even the iris was not visible in them, only the protein. The man continued to talk on the video about what he thought about the correctness of this choice. Moreover, he bowed his gray-haired head and made a promise that Jang Yong-gil would take care of Cha Mu-yeol for the rest of his life. From this, the main character became even more drooping. As it turned out, the man made a bold assumption, although it might seem that he was sure that the people from above had made a firm decision to get rid of the guy. From this remark, a smug smile appeared on his face from ear to ear, when suddenly someone interrupted his monologue by entering the door. When Jang Yong-gil turned his head over his left shoulder, he saw several men in uniform. He tensed his eyebrows, which made his facial expression seem ominous, and was surprised at how quickly they came. Then he pointed with his left hand at the main character, who was watching motionlessly, and could not even turn his head, let alone answer, and exclaimed that it was their elder who did not want to listen to him. There was a smile on his face that reflected madness and craziness to some extent. In his opinion, Cha Mu-yeol's condition should have been the reason that would provoke them to listen to him more carefully. Moreover, none of them wanted anyone to hit him on the head, and even from the back. At this moment, the men lined up in a row and gave a positive response in chorus. When Jang Yong-gil and the rest of the fighters walked out the door, the gray-haired character turned to the main character and instructed him to be a good boy and be healthy, even if he could no longer fight. The man supplemented his monologue with a phrase according to which Cha Mu-yeol was no longer supposed to teach his juniors. Readers could see how disgust was reflected in his gaze. He left the character alone in a dark room. The guy gave himself up to his thoughts, according to which, due to a severe injury leading to paralysis, only his eyes, which were streaming with tears, could move. In his opinion, he was alive, but as dead. The picture began to lead the narrative around Cha Mu-yeol with excess weight. He was at school, sitting at his desk with both hands folded on it. Apparently, the guy was thinking about something, not like his neighbor who lay down and probably slept. As it turned out, the main character indulged in his thoughts. He wondered if it was an illusion after death and coming back to life. The character made a demonstrative exhalation, as if this situation weighed on him. But when he pointed out to the audience the blue window with his personal characteristics, Cha Mu-yeol noticed to himself that it looked quite realistic. Suddenly, 5 plates with different fighting values appeared in front of his eyes: resistance, deflection, pain, knee strike, boxing. Based on his reflections, the character fought really badly before he died. Moreover, in his previous life, he didn't even have time to train. Readers may have noticed how his large black eyes reflected a window of resilience. That's just, in his opinion, boxing could still be learned. And when he realized that he wanted to learn another skill, his body was not sufficiently trained. At this point, the guy's nostrils narrowed and the corners of his lips dropped down. However, this time it was different. One of the reasons was the fact that in addition to all these techniques, SSS durability appeared. The story told how the main character carefully studied the status window. In his mind, he thought that thanks to him and his body, Cha Mu-yeol would be able to return to his dream once again. The guy indulged in memories, according to which he was lifted on his shoulder by either comrades or coaches, and he himself held the winning prize, a belt. Around him, everyone was happy about his victory, so they gesticulated and whistled vividly. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted. Someone opened the door to the office and deliberately slammed it hard. A figure of a tall character appeared in the classroom, wearing a black t-shirt, over which was a white shirt with long sleeves. He had brown hair cut in the shape of a pot, which slightly did not reach his thick black eyebrows. His potato nose attracted all the attention of readers. An angry schoolboy crossed the threshold and put his right hand in the pocket of his black pants, shouting angrily about something. Apparently, he was looking for someone. Cha Mu-yeol turned his head towards him with a completely relaxed expression when he appeared and thought that maybe he should have started with this character. When the enraged guy was right in front of the main character's face, he asked with some indignation if he was the one who touched his friend. The schoolboy put both hands in his pockets, strained his eyebrows, which made his gaze seem very heavy. That's just Cha Mu-yeol gave himself up to his thoughts, according to which, after defeating Young Young-woo and Hong Kwang-woo, rumors quickly spread. His reaction was somewhat inhibited. He parted his plump lips and looked questioningly at the speaker. And after a short period of time, the main character gave a positive answer, but he said it without a shadow of fear. Mentally, Cha Mu-yeol expressed his gratitude to these guys, when suddenly he struck a couple of blows to an angry schoolboy, while he was completely not expecting it. The guy exclaimed that it was a Dempsey roll. It was as if he was playing with his opponent, not giving him a chance and time to defend. Only readers noticed how this schoolboy with a brown pot on his head shouted at the top of his voice to spare him, turned around and ran to the exit. The narration focused on his right hand, which picked up some white object with a red tint. The main character squatted down and began to examine the novelty, at the same time thinking that, in his opinion, everything should have ended if he got them as soon as possible. But that continued to last. The guy made a bold assumption that the children could not control their emotions. That's just when he expressed his gratitude to them for their teeth, but suddenly he was interrupted from his thoughts again. Cha Mu-yeol heard someone swear, so he made a surprised expression and looked in the direction where the noise was coming from. As it turned out, it was a girl with medium-length brown hair. Her bangs covered her eyebrows, which made it difficult to see the full expression of her facial expressions. However, according to her remark, the main character was very good at fighting. The schoolgirl put her right hand on her side and held the phone with her left. Suddenly, the story changed the narrative. This time she was describing a street space. Apparently, it was already evening, because the last rays of the sun illuminated a tall building surrounded by a stone fence. In the next episode, readers' attention was focused on a dark room full of junk. Inside it was a group of schoolchildren. One of the guys called the name of the main character, insulting him in a new remark. As it turned out, a schoolboy in a blue jacket and with a black pot on his head was having a dialogue with him. He indignantly made it clear that it was true. His thick eyebrows closed, making his gaze look like a predatory one. The guy wondered when Cha Mu-yeol had time to learn boxing and give him and his friend a couple of crushing blows. On the other side of the conversation was a student with a brown t-shirt, over which was a white shirt. This character had dark hair pulled back. He dabbled in illegal substances and angrily pulled a smug grin when his friend started talking about boxing. Then the guy laughed it all. After a short period of time, it became clear to readers what the reason was. The stranger felt that the main character should have gone through a few more training sessions. When he put his hands in his pockets and was silent for a while, the character in the blue jacket addressed him as Ju Sing. His eyes, which had shrunk to an unimaginable size, reflected fear. Small drops of cold sweat even flowed down his face, and he, in turn, bared his snow-white teeth and strained his eyebrows, thus emphasizing the wrinkles around his black eyes. He asked the question, according to which the others had any problems. However, the guys spread their hands in different directions and gave a negative response in chorus, at the same time asking Ju Sing to calm down his ardor and temper, referring to the fact that Chong Woo still did not know. And also there were still a lot of those who knew that the guy was really good at judo. And the student himself said that even though Cha Mu-yeol had learned 1 or 2 techniques, regardless of his skills, if the student caught him, the main character would have to pay. In the next episode, the story described his dark eyes, which had shrunk to such a size that the guy could be compared to a madman. He pulled a smile from ear to ear and said that it was time to get down to business, to teach the arrogant guy a lesson. Who, by the way, at that moment arched his left eyebrow and lowered the tips of his lips, which made his expression express a certain detachment, although more disgust. In front of him was a heroine with dark hair who kept telling him that he was very unusual. Moreover, she was interested in the question, according to which where the guy learned to fight like that. However, apparently, the student was dissatisfied with such attention towards him, so he made it clear to her that he himself did not know who she was. Cha Mu-yeol asked her to stop following him. The reason was that they were in the men's room. But the stranger didn't care at all, because she even asked the question what was the matter. The student told her interlocutor that wherever he went, she would still find information about him. This phrase made the main character come to the conclusion that this girl was out of her mind. The next moment, the heroine said that it was the perfect time to deal with bullies. Why did the guy ask what she was talking about? And after a short period of time, he asked her to forget about all this. But the stranger continued to stand her ground. She crossed both arms and added, making an offer to her classmate to catch all the guys with a bad reputation. However, according to Cha Mu-yeol, he was not interested in this in any way. The main character asked what her name was. In the next episode, the story showed readers that the main character was only thinking about fighting. He mentally appealed to Jang Yong-gil with a request to return to MMA. His cheeky face showed diligence and firmness. As it became known, for a rematch, he first had to get into the RFC, a professional league for young and promising fighters. Then the guy gave himself up to thoughts. In his previous life, he had already received a gold medal once. He was only interested in the question of whether he should have started boxing again. When the guys crossed the threshold, the girl exclaimed at the top of her voice that her interlocutor had not responded to her claims. The next moment, someone pushed Cha Mu-yeol with his shoulder. The guy turned his head and looked up slightly, because the stranger was taller than him. It was Ju Sing. The guy was looking down at him, pulling a smug grin, which could make readers disgusted at the sight of him. Suddenly, the schoolboy delivered a crushing blow to the main character using his left leg. The push was so strong that the guy with the extra weight flew off several meters, sliding all the while on the floor. A girl with dark hair stood up for him. However, Ju Sing didn't even pay attention to her because he just gave the order to take her away, which, in fact, happened in the following seconds. The bully looked at his comrades, who stood in an attacking pose, and asked them what they were doing. The schoolboy also said, adding that it was better for these guys to get out of there before he immobilized them too. One of them gave a positive answer, referring to the fact that he was about to leave. Ju Sing then called out to the big-built guy, telling him to hold the girl very tightly. Readers could notice how the heroine was holding the phone at that moment as if she was filming everything that was happening. In the next episode, the story focuses readers' attention on Cha Mu-yeol, who slightly stood up, leaning on both hands behind his back. It was difficult for him because of the excess weight. His face was full of rage. The student gave only one name, Baek Ju-song. At that moment, the guy took a couple of steps in his direction and made it clear that they were not friends. Moreover, he was told that the main character was looking for him. When the schoolboy found himself in front of Cha Mu-yeol, who was already standing on both legs, he asked him, wondering what he wanted from him, making the audacious assumption that he wanted to arrange a fight. The bully laughed without much shyness, and at this moment, the main character's face became more serious, apparently due to the fact that his interlocutor decided that he wanted to crush him. In the next episode, Baek Ju-song took out his phone and asked him a question out loud. He wondered if the guy had forgotten about one video. As it became known after a short period of time, Cha Mu-yeol was on it, who was jumping and clapping his hands at the same time. From this, the schoolboy's eyes narrowed to an incredible size. That's just the bully continued to put pressure on him morally, saying that it wasn't all, because it was just the last video shot. The faces of his friends became smug, and the expression of the girl's facial expressions, on the contrary, surprised. The next moment, the story focused readers' attention on a new remark by Baek Ju-sung, who said out loud that they would shoot another video today. The character stuck out his tongue as if he was teasing the guy, except Cha Mu-yeol wasn't going to stand for it. He hit the hand of his interlocutor, in which there was a phone, which caused him to drop it. The bully swore out loud and bared his snow-white teeth, but at the moment his eyes became more surprised. As it turned out, the reason was that the main character was going to deal him a crushing blow, which made everyone present surprised. The story described how Baek Ju-sung's right cheek turned red from the flowing blood. He was swallowing hard, thus restoring his breath, which had been lost from surprise. Mentally, the bully did not understand how he could allow such a thing. He glared fiercely at his opponent, who clenched his fist at that moment. The main character uttered a remark aloud, according to which he momentarily forgot who was his real target for revenge. His figure was looking down at his opponent. The sunlight fell on his back, thus darkening his face and the front part of his torso, making his silhouette seem cruel. But the bully was still wondering. He couldn't figure out who Cha Mu-yeol really was. The story continues its rapid development. This narration begins with a description of the fight between the main character and Baek Ju-sung. While the second one was trying to somehow neutralize his opponent, Cha Mu-yeol dodged, making various groupings or attacks. They moved at such a fast speed that a small stream of air appeared in the room, which lifted dust from the dirty floor. Such a reaction on the part of the student greatly unnerved the bully. He even mentally cursed and cursed him. When the main character stopped, he lowered his left hand and clenched the other into a fist and pressed it to his side. And readers might have noticed how his legs, folded together, froze in the air, as if he was about to give out some intricate trick. At this moment, Baek Ju-sung, with a red cheek, greedily swallowed puffs of warm air to restore heavy breathing. Large drops of sweat began to flow down his face, which apparently meant that the guy got up to fight hand to hand. The bully strained his thick brown eyebrows, which made his black eyes look heavy. And mentally, the schoolboy reflected on the fact that only a few days had passed, and something had definitely happened to Cha Mu-yeol. The story describes how both characters took a defensive pose. They bent their knees slightly, lowered their pelvis, and gave their body weight a little forward, and also put their hands in front of them in time to either grab the opponent or neutralize him. All you had to do was strike and keep your distance. Suddenly, the attack was launched by Baek Ju-sung, who rushed towards his opponent, cursing at him at the same time. The plan was to grab him by the collar and get it over with. That's just the school bandit failed to crush his opponent, because the main character struck him first, and even right in the jaw. The push and pressure were so lightning fast that the bully flew away from him, closing his eyes and opening his mouth in a quiet scream. The other guys didn't understand anything. Moreover, they did not understand how to react correctly, because one of them, a schoolboy with a brown pot on his head, strained his thick eyebrows, which caused his facial expressions to express anger and hatred. And the second, a large-built schoolboy with a short haircut, opened his mouth in amazement and eyes wide. The second asked the first if they should help their friend, but he, in turn, gave a negative answer, referring to the fact that Ju-sung told them not to interfere, because he wanted to do everything himself. Moreover, the guy Houston was also engaged in judo. However, after this remark, he was no longer sure that the bully had succeeded. Readers saw a drop of doubt in his face, which was covered with cold sweat. Suddenly, the story began to describe a picture in which Baek Ju-sung grabbed the main character by the collar and shouted at the top of his voice with joy that he had caught him. But his cheerful and enthusiastic mood did not last long, because it instantly changed to a repulsively surprised one. The guy opened his mouth and said nothing. His cheek was swollen and his mouth was bleeding. As it turned out, the student's reaction was a little slow, because he had just realized that he had managed to catch his opponent. Therefore, a smug smile appeared on his face, which rose only at one corner. The school bandit shouted at the top of his voice that it was time to end everything. Only something interrupted him and made him watch nervously. After a short period of time, readers became aware that the main character made a lunge on his left leg and struck a crushing blow with his right hand. Now the bully's blood was pouring not only from his mouth, but also from his nose. Apparently, he temporarily lost consciousness from a strong push, because the audience could note to themselves how he rolled his eyes up, and then they were allowed to see his tooth, which seemed to float in the air. Cha Mu-yeol's blows caught Baek Ju-sung by surprise, because he did not even have time to react to new ones, inaccurately fend them off. And now another fist was flying at him, which provoked the appearance of another tooth in space. The bully seemed to have lost the pupils and irises of his eyes, replaced by only the white, which gave his look a somewhat insane appearance, and the school bandit himself seemed to be flying in the air under the pressure of the character's blows. Once again, the guy mentally cursed. The reason was simple and obvious: everything did not go according to his plan. In the next episode, the story describes a picture in which two guys from his group and a girl who was on the side of Cha Mu-yeol were standing. One of the faces reflected incomprehension and even surprise. Apparently, they were waiting for the end and wanted to see how the situation would turn out, and in whose favor. The main character struck at Baek Ju-song again, causing him to literally fly back. And when he landed on the cold stone floor, he involuntarily turned his head to the right side. His eyes were completely white, as if he was a ghost. Readers could have noticed how his second cheek became swollen. Cha Mu-yeol stood with his legs wide apart and looked down at him, while the girl with dark hair was filming everything on her phone. Suddenly the main character spoke, who was finally happy about something, which made the three open their mouths in surprise and watch something expectantly. As it turned out, the thing was that an overweight student jumped up, raising both hands up, and shouted with delight that he had managed to accumulate 30 teeth. And so the combat mission was over. He continued to admire, which only caused others to be in a sense of anxiety. The story continued its rapid development. In the new episode, she describes the bright lights from the glowing windows, because it was already dark outside. This time, a dark blue window popped up in front of the main character, according to which the guy managed to collect 30 teeth from school bullies, for which he had already received 20 points. And Cha Mu-yeol himself sat on the futon and beat his sides, at the same time rejoicing and shouting at the top of his voice about it. The character pulled on a smug smile, slightly baring his snow-white teeth, and began to think about what he could do with his reward in the form of 20 points. Suddenly, cards with different techniques appeared in front of him. These were counterattack skills, fortitude, boxing, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, kicking. The guy was surprised by the third and fourth abilities, because they belonged to Class BF. In the next episode, the main character crossed both arms on his chest and carefully examined the novelties, simultaneously thinking about something important. As it became known after a short period of time, the most difficult thing in his life before was the struggle. Cha Mu-yeol remembered how he knocked over his opponents, and they him. Wrestling helped him a lot, but if a person didn't know jiu-jitsu, then he had no choice but to lose. After this thought, a drop of sweat ran down his fair skin, his eyebrows frowned, and his eyes narrowed. That's just his gaze became more attentive, as if he was a predator who was hunting for his prey. Readers became aware of the reason why the main character began to behave like this. It was that in order for him to become one of the MMA fighters in the future, he should have studied jiu-jitsu. That's why Cha Mu-yeol pulled his index finger and chose the function of the same name. This provoked the appearance of a bright blue color, a variety of similar cards with other movements, which glowed with a bright light poured into space. It even made the main character spread his arms in different directions in surprise. He opened his mouth and watched the situation in surprise, when suddenly everything stopped. The character was sitting on the case and leaned on both hands, slightly leaning back. Readers may have noticed how he gulped air greedily to recover his breath from the overwhelming emotions. Cha Mu-yeol looked at his palms and rarely pulled a satisfied smile from ear to ear, baring his even and snow-white teeth. Mentally, he thought that it was amazing. The reason was that all the techniques immediately came to his mind. And now he's a jiu-jitsu master. The main character stood on both legs and strained his right arm, clenching his fist at the same time. This pose meant victory, because all the information immediately entered his head. Moreover, he will need a lot of time if he continues to study at school. Cha Mu-yeol looked down. Readers could follow how he looked at his stomach. According to the character's thoughts, all he had to do was take care of his body. In the next episode, the guy was already running down the funny street, dressed in a black sports uniform. However, the story decided to switch the audience's attention to a group of schoolchildren who were sitting in a dark room and having a conversation. One of them asked a question. He was interested in who the main character was, because he wasn't that good from the very beginning. That's just such a reaction provoked his interlocutor with a brown pot on his head. This character, with both hands in his pockets, cursed at him and wondered if he was specifically testing the limits of his anger. However, a schoolboy with a large build and short haircut exclaimed, spitting, how Cha Mu-yeol managed to change in such a short time. The beaten Baek Ju-song, in a demanding tone of voice, gave the order for everyone to be silent, because it was their fault why he looked like worse. There was a large patch on each swollen cheek of the guy, and his left eye was almost not visible at all. A friend approached him and asked what he thought about it. He asked him a question, according to which is Baek Ju-song going to stay in the same state? After all, shouldn't they at least have taught a lesson to a cheeky classmate? But his monologue was interrupted by another character, a guy with brown hair and a potato nose. In his opinion, the former would not have been able to handle it on his own, citing the fact that hadn't he seen Cha Mu-yeol fight. After this remark, everyone in the dark room fell silent, indulging in their thoughts. According to the thoughts of one of them, it was a complete disgrace, when suddenly someone interrupted the unfortunate silence. He diluted the situation by saying a remark based on which, if Ju Song allows him to take revenge, he will do everything in his power. This made the school bully react questioningly, who cast his gaze in the direction of the noise. Readers got acquainted with a new character. He was a guy with wavy dark hair and small eyes set wide apart. He had thick bushy eyebrows that grew towards the end. The mysterious hero asked where Cha Mu-yeol was now, whom he had just scolded out loud. They decided to hold a vote. At this very moment, the main character was engaged. He was wearing a black sports uniform and was honing his punches while fighting with someone invisible. Readers could note for themselves how he greedily gulped air to restore heavy breathing. However, the guy still continued to improve his skills by boxing in space, when suddenly someone interrupted his studies, called Cha Mu-yeol by name. The character stopped and turned his head over his right shoulder, casting a surprised glance in the direction from which the noise was heard. As it turned out, it was his new friend who asked him if he always did that. She was wearing a white tank top and blue denim shorts. The girl crossed both arms over her chest and walked towards her classmate. The main character asked her what exactly she was talking about. After a short period of time, the schoolgirl answered him, focusing on breathing through her mouth, because she did not understand how it helped, so from her lips one could hear the assumption that it somehow accelerated the process. However, Cha Mu-yeol said it was just a habit. In the next episode, viewers saw her radiant smile, which was accompanied by a remark, according to which another time the girl invited a classmate to come to her new channel and help her with the video, and added on her own that, in her opinion, the habit of breathing with her mouth was very unusual and strange. The story described how the main character's face was covered with large streams of sweat from doing push-ups. The guy said out loud that he wasn't interested, but the stranger still didn't understand him. She sat down and crossed her legs, explaining that 700,000 YouTube subscribers had invited him. For this simple and obvious reason, he should have been grateful. Moreover, she was interested in why this character trained so hard, so one thought arose in her head, based on which he wanted to become a real fighter. The last words took the character by surprise to some extent, because he stopped doing push-ups, leaning on both hands and his right leg, turned his head over his right shoulder, and looked at the interlocutor. The girl, by the way, was unapproachable. It might seem so to readers, because she said that there was a lot of news on YouTube right now. The heroine made a bold assumption that he did not fight this, so surprise appeared on her face. And in the next episode, she asked for his attention and showed him something on her smartphone. As it became clear after a short period of time, the schoolgirl presented a general training program for fighters. The winner could receive 200 million won and will have the right to work out in the gym. When the guy looked at her, his eyebrows and lips relaxed with interest. The girl explained that all beginners in martial arts are very happy to join her. Moreover, she was firmly convinced that he knew about it because he had trained so hard. Cha Mu-yeol took a cursory glance at his black eyes, which after a short period of time became huge from stupefaction. Suddenly, a crazy thought came to the head of the main character. He decided to take revenge on Jang Yong-gil, because now it is possible. In the next episode, readers could see the message that came to the heroine's phone. The guy with a dark hair color wrote to her. However, it would be difficult for readers to identify his facial features, because the photo was Maltese in size, but the content could only be read. According to him, the stranger asked the interlocutor a question in order to find out if some student was studying with her in the same educational institution. As it became known based on the words of the heroine herself, this character often wrote to her. They stared at the phone questioningly, when suddenly the schoolgirl turned to Cha Mu-yeol and said that he should be grateful for talking to her, to which he simply gave a positive answer without a shadow of interest. The main character wondered if that user was a famous person, when suddenly his friend, for some unknown reason, uttered the word no. That is why the student turned his head over his right shoulder and began to watch the speaker questioningly. However, there was some kind of horror or regret on her face. The girl arched her eyebrows and looked at Cha Mu-yeol, asking him what it was. As it turned out, when he was fighting with Baek Ju-song, someone was filming them. The heroine showed him a video in which the guys stood opposite each other and used their fists. The file was signed as Chaos Reigns in the School. In addition, the situation was similar to the fact that this video was edited, and it showed that the main character was just trying to neutralize his opponent. The The story informed readers about the occurrence of angry comments. This made the student even more furious. He arched his left eyebrow and bared his teeth, looking at the smartphone screen that his friend was holding. She asked what they should do now. The narration described how the main character mentally cursed Baek Ju-sung, who not only attacked him, but also framed him. Suddenly, something caught Cha Mu-yeol's attention. The stunned one called Yun Min by name. Now readers have finally found out what her name is. The girl turned her head towards the speaker who asked her to help. Silence hung between the guys for a while. Apparently, the heroine did not expect that her classmate would ask her for anything at all. Therefore, her reaction was somewhat inhibited, because she just asked as if she hadn't heard. In the next episode, the story describes to the audience how something started. And at that moment, a dark background appeared before their eyes, which was diluted by a brown chair, a blue keyboard and a mouse. After a short period of time, it became known that it was a real-time chat, which was already watched by 28 people. According to the comments, users have been waiting for his appearance for a long time. Moreover, they would like to see who still led the live broadcast. One of them asked the blogger to show his cute face. And unexpectedly for the readers and viewers of the hour, Cha Mu-yeol appeared on a black background. For this simple and obvious reason, the comments seemed to explode, because in the opinion of subscribers it was a kind of fraud. Because they knew that the chat belonged to Yun Min. Sitting in a pink room in front of a lamp and a computer, the main character lowered his head, as if he was guilty, and introduced himself. After that, several characters made the audacious assumption that they had already seen him, which is why they made the unanimous decision that Cha Mu-yeol had done something to the girl. However, the student was unshakable. He continued his monologue. The reason he borrowed Mina's channel was to discuss that viral video. Users asked him to sing a song or call from his brother, but others wrote that he pretended to be a victim. The main character gave a positive answer, which meant that he was the person who crushed Baek Ju-sung. In the next episode, the guy lifted the left corner of his lips, causing a cheeky expression to freeze on his face. He said aloud, addressing his abuser, that he would soon deal with him once and for all. As it turned out, Baek Ju-sung himself and his company were watching this broadcast, and the students heard how Cha Mu-yeol threatened them that he would make them pay for everything. The story continues its rapid development. This time, the narrative describes to readers how Cha Mu-yeol gave a positive answer, which meant that it was he who crushed the ill-mannered Baek Ju-sung. The guy pulled an ill-fated smile, baring his snow-white teeth. Moreover, he will get rid of him as soon as possible and make him suffer punishment. The student himself with a swollen right cheek was covered with large drops of sweat. Apparently, he was nervous because his opponent's words made the guy's saggy soul swear. His friends, who wrote over his battered figure, picked up his mood and tried to make sure whether Cha Mu-yeol had gone crazy. His second acquaintance asked, squatting down, what they needed to do now, because according to him, the main character would definitely come for him. However, Baek Ju-sung decided to appear brave. He stood up on both feet and straightened up, simultaneously shouting at the top of his voice that there was no need to be afraid. The reason was simple and obvious. The public was on their side, so the main character couldn't do anything if they didn't resist. That's just in the next episode, someone interrupted from the conversation. Someone came into the room, who repeated his last remark, based on which the students will be interested to see what he will do. The three characters turned their heads in the direction from where the noise came from. Surprise was reflected on their faces. After a short period of time, the story showed the readers Yun Min and Cha Mu-yeol. The guy leaned his left hand on the glass handrail and watched his classmates with a calm expression of facial expressions. But the girl giggled viciously. She pulled a winning smile in a gesture that they literally just caught someone red-handed. In her right hand, the heroine held a black tripod with a phone and filmed the reaction of the trio. When Baek Ju-sung looked at Cha Mu-yeol and Yun Min with a swollen right cheek, readers could notice how drops of cold sweat flowed down his face. Moreover, his black eyes seemed to have been swallowed up by the white space, because from alertness and dazed, the iris and pupils seemed to have disappeared. He opened his mouth and watched his classmates. In the next episode, the main character finally entered into a dialogue. He strained his thick black eyebrows and pulled a victorious smile, at the same time saying that, of course, Cha Mu-yeol should have beaten Baek Ju-sung until he resisted. As it turned out, the guys were standing in the same place where they shot the video when the main character was doing physical exercises. The bright rays of the sun illuminated the space filled with various pipes and tanks. Suddenly, an overweight schoolboy with distraught eyes said out loud that he should let his opponent draw a conclusion. According to the first, the guy asked a question based on which Baek Ju-sung would like to be neutralized, and then he would start resisting. But the second option was that a self-confident schoolboy could be defeated during a fight. Then came the comments that called Cha Muyul a gangster. At this moment, the main character turned to the audience and made it clear to them that they could really claim it. Moreover, he even gave their address, as it became known after a short period of time. The guys were in the back park of the Junmok school. New messages from viewers said that at the moment this is the real-time video that was most often searched for. Cha Muyul stood in the left corner to open a view of the rest of the hooligans. Baek Ju-song cast a furious glance at his opponent and mentally cursed at him, while simultaneously indulging in reflections according to which he was interested in what he needed to do. The guy was curious whether he just had to run away or not. Suddenly, someone addressed the character by name, causing his black eyes to shrink to an unthinkable size. Moreover, drops of sweat began to flow on his fair skin. As it turned out, it was the main character. He turned in the direction of his abuser and with a smile on his face said that he should not have run away. The reason was simple and obvious. Cha Muyul made a promise to catch up with him if he did run, and then crush him. All this time, Yoon-mina was holding a tripod with a phone and taking pictures. Moreover, the student scolded him, saying that Baek Ju-song could go and complain to his mother. From this remark, the guy strained his eyebrows, bulged his eyes, which greatly emphasized his wrinkles in the upper part of his face, and bared his snow-white teeth, which caused readers to trace the appearance of swollen veins on his jaw. However, the main character did not stop there. He asked his rival if he really grew up in a dysfunctional family, because judging by his behavior, this was also possible. Some commentators even admired how witty Cha Muyul was. In the next episode, Baek Ju-song took off his long-sleeve white shirt and gave his classmate a positive response. He started to take steps in his direction, at the same time shouting at the top of his voice that they really needed to fight. But, as it might seem, the main character was only pleased with such a reaction, because he sincerely smiled and said that now it was the same Baek Ju-song that he knew. The guy clapped his hands, holding his boxing gloves with his right hand, and the next time he threw them in the red helmet at the feet of the opponent, which made him stop for a while. Cha Muyul made it clear in a demanding tone of voice that he should take them. Baek Ju-song, in turn, arched one eyebrow at his classmate's demanding tone and opened his mouth without making a sound. He cast an incomprehensible glance at the main character, who asked him a question in retaliation. The guy was wondering what he was doing because he literally just told him to put them on. At this time, Cha Muyul himself was pulling on blue wrestling gloves and perplexedly watching the further actions of his interlocutor. But the school bully didn't want to follow his lead. He got angry, readers could tell by the expression on his face. The guy arched both eyebrows, opening his black eyes wide, which gave his look a wild look, like an angry predator. Baek Ju-song shouted at the top of his voice words that meant he hated the overweight character. He made it clear that he didn't need the red gloves and helmet, so he kicked them away with his left foot. The demonstrative action on the part of the student forced Cha Muyul to ask him a question, according to which he wanted to make sure whether the bully really did not need them. In the next episode, the story described how the main character jumped, and readers could follow and note for themselves how both of his legs seemed to freeze in the air, pushing off from the stone-gray floor. That's just the overweight character was only happy with this outcome of events for the simple and obvious reason that, in his opinion, it would be a fair fight. His figure was hidden by the shadow, but this did not prevent you from seeing the evil expression of his gaze on his face, and the blue glove, which was making a swinging movement, preparing to strike his opponent. The story focused on his hand, around which a dark repulsive aura appeared. Apparently, such a sharp activity on the part of Cha Muyul made the school bandit nervous, because his eyes grew to an unthinkable size, and a drop of cold sweat flowed down his left cheek. After a short period of time, the audience could see how the main character dealt a crushing blow to the jaw of his opponent, around which even a bright orange glow appeared. The blue glove made Baek Ju-sung turn his head to the right side, although one of his eyes was still open. That's just it didn't matter for the simple and obvious reason that the student didn't have time to react, dodging, or use a counterattack. However, apparently, he was just preparing because his left hand, clenched into a fist, was raised up. Cha Muyul continued his series of punches. The aftershocks and their pressure were so strong that they were literally slamming into the wall of a touchy with a swollen cheek. Readers could even notice how a small stream of air appeared in the space. The comments seemed to explode again. Users called the main character quite agile, despite his problems with excess weight. In the next episode, the character pulled a satisfied grin, because he was sure of his victory. The guy hit his opponent, thus bringing him to the floor, which could even be traced in slow motion. That's just Baek Ju-song didn't fall in one place. He literally rolled across the stone floor, heading towards where his comrades were standing and watching the situation. and those, in turn, spread their arms and looked at the school bully, after which clouds of dust rose, without even trying to stop him. In the next moment, the story focuses readers' attention on Cha Mu-yul, who straightened his silhouette and impressively watched his abusers. His slightly arched thick eyebrows and slightly parted plump lips against the background of plump cheeks gave him a relaxed look, as if almost all the work had already been done. The guy even breathed steadily, suggesting to the audience that he was not tired in any way. However, according to commentators, it was too much. Moreover, as it became known thanks to several of them, strangers have already reported this. Suddenly, two dark silhouettes appeared on the right side of the main character. One of the men gave an order that everyone stay in their seats. In the next episode, the story allowed readers to take a closer look at them. They were law enforcement officers who wore black trousers with a molding of this color and a blue long-sleeve shirt with a badge on it. The policeman angrily asked the students a question, demanding that they tell them what they were doing. Commentators at this moment turned to strangers and asked them to grab Cha Mu-yul. Suddenly, Baek Ju-sung, who had a red nose, entered the dialogue. He was bleeding from there, and not only. Apparently, his mouth was also injured. The schoolboy pointed his index finger at his opponent and, wrinkling his face, made it clear to the police that he had attacked him. The screams of the school bully were accompanied by a shift in the focus of the story from him to Cha Mu-yul, who continued to stand and watch him, holding both hands in blue gloves. Yeon-mina continued to shoot with her phone all this time, holding a black tripod and standing a little to the side. Suddenly, in the next episode, the narrative began to describe the reaction of two policemen. They furrowed their brows and watched the students for a while. Baek Ju-sung, with a swollen face, scolded the main character and said that now he was finished. Moreover, now his whole life will be ruined because of such a terrible act. The school bandit's face was frozen with a grin and a smug expression of facial expressions that spoke of his self-confidence. That's just how things turned out differently. Readers may have noticed how one of the policemen squatted down next to Baek Ju-sung, who had a question on his face, and only thanks to his bulging eyes and surprise, it became clear that the situation had turned far from in his favor. He even opened his mouth. The guy was looking down somewhere, and in the next episode, the reason became clear. It consisted of handcuffs that were fixed on his hands. Mentally, the bully tried to understand why everything happened like that. After a short period of time, it became known that Baek Ju-sung was arrested on charges of making fun of a minor. A policeman with an angry expression on his face said that he had the right to remain silent. That's just the guy, in turn, freaked out. He pointed at Cha Mu-yul and asked why they were arresting him, because they had to do it with the main character. In the next episode, readers could notice how some kind of countdown was going, reaching the mark from 128 to 129. At this moment, an overweight student was twirling a smartphone in his left hand, on the screen of which something was depicted. The guy put his right hand in his pocket and pulled a smug smile. As it turned out, the character showed him a video of his jumps, curious in advance that he had really forgotten about him. Moreover, all this time Cha Mu-yul kept all these videos and photos in which classmates made fun of him. From this information, horror froze on Baek Ju-sung's face, which was accentuated by the shadow on his eyes. And at the last moment, the guy uttered words according to which it was not his life that was destroyed, but his abuser, that is, Baek Ju-sung. New comments poured in. Based on them, people began to doubt the veracity and authenticity of the video, but others now called the victim not a bully, but the main character. Readers may have noticed how two policemen led away a school bandit, leaving behind only a long shadow. That's just some commentators wondered why they did something like that over Cha Mu-yul if he was good in battle. Moreover, they could not come to a unanimous conclusion who made him an outcast, making the audacious assumption that it was Baek Ju-sung, whose bloodied face still reflected fear. According to the viewers of the live broadcast, it was a good way to educate bullies. One of them, with his eyes wide open, was trying to come to his senses. Suddenly, an overweight character entered the dialogue. He said out loud that Malcolm X had once said that his attacks were not called elimination when it was done for defensive purposes. This is the carrier of the name of intelligence. The main character, with a confident expression on his face, said that he had been an outcast for a long time. Money was taken from him. They made fun of him almost every day. And that was the reason why he learned to box, to be a reasonable person. After these words, the story focused on his fist. Apparently, it was difficult for the guy to talk about it. Of course, Cha Mu-yul was willing to gladly accept any punishment for what he did today, but he just wanted everyone to know that what the character did was a way of self-defense. The schoolboy lowered his head because he was remorseful. Moreover, after some time of silence, it became known that the main character, studying martial arts, found what he really wanted to do. The school bullies, Baek Ju-sun's friends, watched Cha Mu-yeol's actions with open mouths, even when he said that he wanted to become stronger. The reason was not only that the guy wanted to be free from fun, but he wanted to be able to fight with more experienced people. At that moment, Yeon-mina said out loud that the number of viewers continued to grow, which greatly pleased her. The main character said that this was the reason why he would like to take part in The Real Fighter. Such reaction and attitude of Cha Mu-yeol excited commentators who considered it a good ending for the story. Moreover, everyone expressed words of support to him. In the next episode, the picture focuses readers' attention on a bright room, in the middle of which there was a huge wooden table, behind which sat a silhouette in a gray suit. On the contrary, he had a character in brown. He gathered both hands behind his back and watched his interlocutor. As it turned out, the two men were watching a live broadcast on which Cha Mu-yeol dealt a crushing blow to Baek Ju-sun. It was Jang Yong-gil. Even if it was just a coincidence, the situation looked strange. At that moment, the commentators called the name of Cha Mu-yeol. They believe that if the guy trains more, he has every chance to become better than another person with the same name. The character in the brown suit said that it was really strange, because even their fighting style was similar. Readers got acquainted with the secretary of the head of the RFC office, Woo Hyun-chul. Jang Yong-gil replied to him, saying that Cha Mu-yeol was not one of those who would secretly train a successor because he was too busy fighting and training, and so he made an offer to visit him. However, the secretary made it clear that the main character was still a minor. Moreover, it could have a bad effect on middle and high school students. The gray-haired man asked him if Mr. Java knew the principle of their business, because the goal was not to be clean, but to make money by giving people what they wanted to see. They have always loved to watch fights, since the days of dog fights and fights in basements. This instinct did not weaken. However, Cha Yong-gil guaranteed that even the minister would be watching their real fighter. In the next episode, the story described a group of guys who were in the locker room, as well as viewers with cameras. Han Gi-ju said that 3 strikes were made in 2 minutes, which was too difficult for the first qualifying round. However, Kang Hae-min didn't think so, because if you look at Chang Chun-min, Ba Krasin, Ki Won-gi, they fought at the appropriate levels. The girl replied that even considering 1 hit, it is a miracle. But the guy didn't understand why they considered 3 necessary. As it turned out, President Chan developed these requirements to make it easier for him to choose a fighter. They came to the conclusion that he was old-fashioned. Han Kai-ju asked if Cha Mu-yeol would succeed, hoping that he would show his best side. Now he was the creator of martial arts issues. However, the girl saw someone, which made both of them turn their heads. She thought she saw Cha Mu-yeol, but the guy thought they should have interviewed him. Except it turned out to be true. The main character said that he was now in his best condition.